Oh yeah.
Well, so
I like had the stream muted or unmuted, and I just assumed that I can hear you. So.
yeah, well, that's fixed now. So uh,
Oh,
that was a nice intro. It's all.
but but they could have heard all that rad music you were playing before the stream
I
started.
think the music went through, which is why I muted our mics so that they didn't go through. But then I didn't unmute them at all. So yeah, it's good
That's
times
fine.
all around.
Yeah.
So
Well, anyone that invested in learning how to lip read could have learned a lot from our previous conversation. But I guess we'll just go forward.
yeah, so basically, I'm here with Getting Over It Pro and part-time Magic player commentator Jonathan Sukenik, who we established has very little success in Legacy,
Yep.
and other than a couple little wins here and there on the Pro Tour, but yeah, nothing
Yeah.
really.
Just you know, I'm. It's just the LSV stuff. Luck, skill, victory. I'm just LV.
Yeah, all right. So I know Depths is basically your wheelhouse, so you're the perfect person to do this with.
Yeah. I mean, like literally this year, I think anyone can do it. Like everyone has to embrace the 2020 this year. So
It's the
you
right
don't.
year, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm definitely just as qualified as anyone else.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, if you didn't know, my online name is currently DN Solver. Um, I'm apparently multiple people now. That's apparently a thing.
Wait, that's you too.
Allegedly, I don't think
Wait,
so.
I thought that was someone else.
It is, but I'm apparently one of his alts.
Yeah,
But
you were like the duplicator guy or something.
yeah, that was the one time that I wanted to experiment to see how much different online play would be, having the majority of the opponents not knowing what you were on to start the match. And that was right after the London Mulligan rule, which I think kind of made having everyone know what you were on even worse, especially post board. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was night and day. But I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not going to make a new account every every few months to make that work in the long run. But it was a neat experiment.
I also did something similar, but for a different reason. Where there's this one period of time in college after I was like established meadow grinder. I just stopped like writing for Star City. I stopped streaming. I just internally felt like I was not a particularly good Magic player, and that all this like praise or like how people feel about me was like undeserved. So I made a secret account, like an alt account, and didn't really tell anyone about it. And I just played on that for like a year or two and just really like I actually just moved like very minimal stuff from Watchwolf92 to that. And I'm like, all right, I'm just giving you one deck, 100 tickets, and that's it. If I'm actually good at this game, I should be able to like dominate and put up like good results. I put up a lot of like not like PTQ winning, but like I won like a bunch of the equivalent of challenges at the time or premier events. I still like multi queued and was able to do very well. I had people asking me for deck lists and stuff. So, uh, and like I don't use the alt account anymore because I have a little more confidence than I did back then. But um, it was still pretty cool just to do that. So I think that experience like we did it for two different reasons, but it's interesting how you can like kind of it's not something you can ever do in a live tournament. You can't just be another person in a live tournament, but it's cool to see how it looks when people perceive you differently.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think part of like a secondary reason for why I was using the alt stuff is because at the time I was queued for the Legacy Championships, and I kind of wanted to test for a few months with tweaking depths, but also messing with some other decks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, trying to trick myself that I would do anything but play depths in that event, um, in the kind of in the dark, so that not everyone would have the exact 75 that I was on, or whatever else I was messing with. But
But let's be honest. I mean, only what like 50 of the cards in the 75 really matter.
yeah, I ended up playing turbo depths in that event, which really hurts me to this day.
Yeah,
But
yeah. It's your favorite build of the deck.
it's my second favorite build of the deck. So I guess we have a million of these matchups to do, since you said you wanted to do literally everything.
Yeah,
Um, so I guess we'll jump into it and storytell as we go.
yeah.
Um,
So the deck you're using is the same as the one on the cardboard live.
Yeah, so basically, I've been on well, I took a 3 or 4 month break after January, after a few big events, and when I came back, I just literally played the same 75 that I played from that format championship, and it just still was fine. Like oddly, like I don't think, there's some new decks in Legacy, but I don't think that much changed because a bunch of the big meta adjustments all got banned. So like during my
Mhm.
break, Loris was a huge thing, Breach was a huge thing, and both of them, just disappeared. So it was almost like when I came back, it was like when everyone thought the meta was going to revert to mono snow, or
Yeah,
Snowco, and that didn't really happen. But I don't know that there's like this mass influx. Like I think at the end of the day, we're going to add like 3 or 4 decks. Let's see what the actual requests are. Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 decks that I consider like you're like above average to face in any given long tournaments, like the Snowco, Espervile, um, the Noah Walker Special, Sharkstill, and the Titan Stompy deck are kind of newish, all relatively newish anyway. But other than that, there's just like changes here and there, like some additions and tweaks to existing decks, but I don't know. There hasn't been anything printed in the last 6 months that would make a massive deck list swing in depth shells, in my opinion.
right. So what the purpose of what we're kind of doing today is we're going to start off with the assumption that this is the 75 you're going to play, and then given that that's what you're going to play, what is kind of the plan in kind of a generalized way. Like it's kind of difficult. There's kind of a few ends of like two ends of the spectrum of like how people tell other people how they should sideboard and stuff. One end of the spectrum is, okay, this is a sideboard guide and this is what you do all the time until something like tells you otherwise. Then the other end is kind of like I'm going to teach a person how to fish. Like, I'm not going to tell you how to sideboard with this deck because you should discover on your own like what the different purposes of the cards are. And at the end of the day, those people don't have as rigid like sideboard plans. And I think at the end of the day, just something in the middle is correct. I think everyone should be able to say that, like, if your opponent just said, I was on this deck, and then they concede game one, and you can trust them 100% of the time, everyone has a default that they do, and that's kind of what we're expressing here today. And it is slightly different when you're a more, say, combo-oriented deck versus, say, like an aggro control mirror or something like that. Like, when there's a lot of texture and, like, all these things going on about like how the game can develop, then that can lead to a lot of different sideboarding based on how people would want to orient their deck. But when you're playing a more polarized deck like what Tom is here, it makes a lot more sense that I'm doing my thing. I care about these subsets of things you can do. So there's only so much play that can go around that. But for instance, just like making up a random example, it could be possible that some random green deck just like has a crop rotation package in their sideboard, and we've never seen that particular green deck do it before. Like, we would obviously have to pivot in that matchup, and understanding like, okay, I cut these cards and bring in these in the matchup. These are kind of stinkers that I'm playing, but I have to. And like, if you hear that during the sideboard guide, then if something catches you off guard like that, then you know what the like shaveable room is, or why we're leaving something in the sideboard, even though there could be something reasonable that could happen to us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you always have to. I would never tell someone that you just do this every single time. Like, this is a hard and fast rule, because I don't even follow this. Like, even 6 months ago, around January, the last time I updated this, on any given match, I wouldn't follow what was in there. You have to constantly adjust to your opponent's play style and to the cards that you see. Like, I guess one of the better examples I could see is that's relevant for a conversation is I remember when I played you in one of the Star City events, and it looks like a traditional Delver deck for the most part, but in game two, you got me with basically, throughout the course of the game, I saw like 3 different instant speed 2-drops that can answer the combo. I saw Echoing Truth, I saw Edict, and it's just like at a certain point, like the person has enough, so I ended up bringing in like a copy of Flusterstorm just to try and fight that a little bit, which is just something I would never do against Delver, and never did before and haven't done since, because you normally don't see that many two casting cost cards that a Flusterstorm would interact favorably. Normally you see like maybe like a one of Vapor Snag or a free casting cost Submerge if you expose a forest, that kind of stuff. Like you don't expect to see like E-Truth, Edict, you know.
Yeah,
and,
I think those two Edicts and a Truth, but yeah.
Whatever, you don't expect to have 3 two casting cost answers out of a Delver Shell. That's a little unusual. So unless, well, nowadays maybe Brazen Borrower, but obviously, you know, that was a while ago, the match we're talking about. But yeah, you always have to just leave the door open based on what you see. I played a deck yesterday, and I think it's starting to become a little bit of a trend where these like 3 and 4 color pile decks, whether it's Snowco or the Sharkstill decks, are starting to have like copies of Wasteland in them. So you see, like I played against someone last night that showed me 3 copies of Wasteland in their 4 color deck, like with Astrolabe. So it's kind of like, all right. But you know, there's like cards that I snap board out in those matchups, like Needles and things like that, where if they show you enough, like if you see 3 or 4 Okos and they show you 3 Wastelands and you've seen Caracas, it's like at a certain point, like that's a card I never leave in that matchup, but you know, then you have to figure it out on the fly what is and isn't worth doing.
Yeah, and one spot that I think building, I guess we could call it like a 70% like deck sideboard guide or something like that. Like, it is true that you're going to do something like a majority of the times if someone's just like a very average person that's playing a very average list or something like that. Like, you are going to do certain things. And what I think that process is really good for is like laying out what you want to do in those matchups is good for building the sideboard in the first place. So knowing like how many cuttable cards you have. Like if you just say to someone like, yeah, you'll just learn how to sideboard, then like how do I know when I'm supposed to play 2 flexible cards instead of 1 flexible card and 1 like hammer that are like very similar in terms of what they do? Like the event that that you alluded to, like the decision to play like Edicts and Echoing Truth, like they do similar purposes against specifically Merit Lage, but there's other matchups that those are for. Like I'm bringing Echoing Truth against Storm because of Empty the Warrens, but I'm bringing Edict in the Delver Mirror. So like where your flexibility lies, like you need to like I think building sideboards from a macro standpoint kind of helps at first. So we can start with like, okay, this is my main deck. I'm gonna treat that as sacred. Like I'm not touching that 60. Then in the sideboard, I want, you know, 3 pieces of graveyard hate, 2 counter type spells, or 2 ways to remove like permanents, and you can like have these buckets. But before you know it, you'll just have like 18 like sideboard slots. But then this one card does these 2 things, but badly. And then, you know, I need this hammer in this matchup. Like it has to be Leyline. It can't be Nihil Spellbomb. But if it's Nihil Spellbomb, I could bring it against Miracles and stuff like that. So at least today, like we're assuming that effort already went in, that we already knew generally what we wanted certain sections of our cards to do, and that yielded this 15 card sideboard. Now that we're accepting the 75 as a given, what do we think we're going to do, say 70% of the time in the matchup, and where there may be some like flexible room to like do other things. So
exactly. If we get through it fast enough, we could go through a list of thanks for the raid, Honorog.
Woo!
So if we get through it fast enough, we could go through some cards that have traditionally been played in depth sideboards that, you know, I don't particularly think are worthwhile at the time being for whatever reason. Like I think there's a pile of cards that aren't good enough because Veil of Summer exists, and another pile of cards that have just time has passed by, or there are very specific reasons why I wouldn't include them that I see in lists. So we could go through that kind of stuff too if we have time.
Yeah, and this isn't one of those brainstorm single stifle lists. I don't know what's wrong with you today, but
yeah, that list is so much more versatile. It makes me sad. We don't need to cry over old deck lists, though. Speaking of Honorog, it's been a while since I've seen that deck list. A week or so. So I guess we'll just start with Learn. I guess the easiest way to do it is to just look at the decks one by one and see what they're kind of doing as far as what issues they present in the matchup. So this is a recent challenge, high finishing list from Otaba, who if anyone plays Magic Online a lot, you're going to run into this person. They're a very good Aloran player.
What's
So,
the blue white card do?
which one? Oh, Nyambi.
Yeah. Something with legendary card and you can like bounce your own thing, I think.
So basically, if you discard a legendary card, you draw 2 cards. So when it enters the
Well, it's
battle,
probably for the previous ability though, right?
yeah. So when it enters the battlefield, you can return another target creature you control to its owner's hand, and if you do, you gain a life
So
equal.
that with Cavern Harpy is just infinite life.
Yeah, but or just incidental life with other creatures too, resetting like a Quaddle to draw another card, that sort of stuff. So it's kind of neat, but I guess the kind of card you don't really want more than one copy of.
Yeah, it's kind of just like a better Dreamstalker, probably.
Yeah. So from the depths perspective, the obvious level 1 stuff is Quaddle to block, but fortunately for us, they don't have a follow up to actually kill the token. There's no copies of Oko or Jace or anything like that
There's
here.
an Oko right there. You can't trick me.
What's that?
There's an Oko right there in the sideboard.
In the sideboard, in the main deck, there are no ways to. So in game 1, we don't really have to worry about that. And honestly, I'm probably not playing around the 1 of Oko post board either. If they get you a flying blocker into the 1 of Oko, so be it. And then I guess they have a little bit of life gain with the Nyambi that you just mentioned, and the Euro, and possibly Parasitic Strix, and then just a bunch of flyers. No counter magic to speak of in the main deck, just a little bit of discard, so 7 discard spells. So I think generally speaking, this is going to be a pretty favorable matchup. Game 1.
You're kind of just racing to your combos, but you have discard spells and your combo comes out faster.
Yeah, and all their flyers are blue. So Sejiri Step is very live to just push through regardless, unless they've gone over 20. So yeah, I think this is going to be the kind of matchup where I think we're in pretty good shape. The sideboard doesn't give them a ton. They can bring in the forces if they want. Oko obviously would come in. Knight of Autumn's another card that could possibly answer something out of our side. Probably.
Or gain 4 to try
but
to
yeah,
buy
more
that.
likely to gain the life, yeah. And I've seen some players bring in Plague Engineer and try to shut off Hex Mage. I don't know that that's particularly relevant here, since we're not going to bring in like Sylvan Safekeepers or any of that kind of nature of cards. So it would really just be on Hex Mage duty, which more often than not is going to come down underneath the Engineer unless they're on the play anyway. So I think the sideboarding for this matchup should be pretty minimal, and that's how it was in the past, where they're not the kind of deck that's going to super pressure your life total. So I like Sylvan Library. And then even though the decays don't answer the Allurin itself, they do answer some of the combo pieces in front of it, or remove some of their flying blockers if they only have one. Most of the cards in the sideboard just aren't relevant in Allurin anyway. The one spot that's questionable is whether or not you would want to bring in Force of Vigors as an answer to Allurin itself, but my experience in the matchup is just we're normally just much faster, and we can set up a kill before they can actually Allurin kill us this, because it is a 4-drop, and then on top of that, we have all of our discard and disruption pieces in front of it as well.
So like another problem with Force of Vigor is that they can just continue to go off in response because everything's instant speed. So there might have been a period of time where maybe they played, I don't know, 1 Cavern Harpy or something like that, and then when it's on the stack, you can try to target the Safekeeper, but nowadays everything's so redundant that they can just continue to go off in response.
Yeah. So yeah, that's another part of the whole. So I don't know that there's too much to change. I don't know if anything is jumping out to you that could possibly be an idea.
Yeah, I'm just looking at our utility lands to see if they're so like one thing I'm not sure about is so it says to cut 2 needles in a bog.
Yeah.
The needles make a decent amount of sense to me. I guess you would only name like Oko or Harpy or
Yeah, there's limited options for that, unless this is versus a different list. This is just one list we're looking at, but yeah, they're pretty limited in the matchup.
So one thing I'm not sure about is maybe you can have more equity of just having 1 less needle on the bog in terms of just like being able to keep a larger range of hands where you would just want to play like Black Source on turn 1, or just having the extra land to crop rotate away. Could there be some consider like also if you have 2 needles in your deck, that can be like extremely bad towards you. Like you don't have brainstorm in this list or anything like that, but the actual just black mana source, even though it comes to play tapped, might have more utility.
Okay. Yeah. So the reason, and it's going to be like, this is going to be a recurring theme basically in every single matchup. So basically, Turbo Depths was traditionally always a 23 land deck. So
Okay.
at some point, more or less, people came to the conclusion, and I came to the same conclusion, that Caracas was a main deck card
Mm.
for a variety of reasons. There were enough depths/lands, mirrors, and other matchups where it just had really good value, or the matchups were medium or hard. So like it's very good against bouncing Thalia against DNT or against Sneak and Show. It has enough value that even though it's an off-color land in a deck that's already running 8 colorless lands, um, it kind of belonged in the main deck,
Mm.
but it doesn't really count towards the land total. So it just basically what ended up happening is just the deck got another land. But I think it operates off of 23 pretty well because it has, on top of the 24 in game ones, and it also has 4 petals for Elf Spirit Guides. So the deck is, 32 mana sources, which is kind of a ton. So when you go down to 31, the deck kind of still operates fine. So
Yeah.
there are situations where the deck plays itself into color issues for obvious reasons with the 8 colorless lands, but it does operate off 23. So basically a common theme is you'll see, well, in some matchups will come more than one land, but in basically every matchup, the worst land comes out as a starting point to get yourself back to the 23 because the deck operates fine without it.
Yeah.
However, there's
It
definitely
just seems like the needle might be bad enough.
even worse, that you might as
Yeah.
well even add that +1 land just to make sure that there aren't issues there. Especially since the deck is kind of slim on black and green sources, having another black source is probably a good call. I think I like that.
Yeah, like the way I kind of view it is that if the matchups are good for you and it's not going to get much better for them, then I just want to minimize the amount of times where I'm forced to mulligan where I would otherwise not want to. And then, so this is kind of like what we're alluding to earlier. If you see like an Oko or two or something
You can
in
always
game two,
revert back to that, yeah.
yeah. So like knowing that Bog is the flexible land here, but like Needle just sounds so bad that I just want to minimize the amount of times we're mulliganing. That feels better to me.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Um, to answer one of the questions I saw in the chat while we were talking, the reason there's Leyline of the Voids in the deck is just matchups like sideboard mapping. So there's matchups where Leyline of the Void is just an absolute hammer. And even in those matchups where Surgical is good, Leyline is just brutal. So when you're talking about like the Dredges, the Hogaks, the Black Red Reanimators, Leyline is just superior to Surgical Extraction. And in particular against deck like Black Red, having a split graveyard hate really makes them react to both or risk losing to one badly. So like if they're not gonna, if they know your list and they know you have 2 Ley Lines of the Void, are they really gonna bring in 6 to 8 answers, like 4 Reverent Silences? Like their answers are really narrow to Leyline. Usually it's like a Wear Tear or Serenity plus Reverent Silence and some numbers. So they can either do that, and then the majority of the games when you don't have the Leyline and you have the Surgical Hands, they've basically just diluted their deck. Plus, they're not really sure what they need to play around, and it makes evaluating their opening hands really difficult. But on the other side of that, there's control decks, and we use Surgical as an answer to Swords to Plowshares. We try to remove or Snapcaster Swords. So that's a relevant card in those matchups where Leyline of the Void is something you wouldn't really want. So Surgical can do like a secondary discard, like Impression, where you take a Swords out of their hand early if they have more than one, or you're worried about them drawing into another, or a Snapcaster, or Surgical is like a must counter card at any point as the game goes, from shutting their answers off. So you kind of have the graveyard decks covered in a way that makes it really awkward for them to approach, while also having cards that are versatile enough, having a couple cards that are versatile enough in other matchups to justify the space.
Yeah, it seems like it's the kind of situation that you might have started with like, hey, I want 4 graveyard hate spells, and then realizing that it's like it's easier for the graveyard oriented opponent to take advantage of your sideboarding plan if you do only play Landline of the Void, and then that combined with the extra utility that you can gain out of Surgical even though it's not the same kind of hammer in the graveyard matchups, can also make your ley lines more potent by playing less of them.
Yeah.
Is more or less the concept.
Yeah, and they often they just I mean imagine being from like a black red player's side. You know the 75, you know both are coming in and you have a hand that can turn one with a discard spell, but you can't answer a ley line. You're probably just going to lose if you keep that. You can't ship it, so you're basically guessing. And in reverse, if you have a hand that has Reverent Silence plus a turn one combo, but you don't have a discard spell or a way to interact, and you're just going to eat it to surgical, and you're evaluating your hands, and you really just have to cross your fingers and hope that you're running into the, or just avoid it entirely. Like I know, talk to players, they're just like, all right, whatever. If you have the ley line, I'm just going to lose to it because it's not worth. And that in and of itself is free wins when that comes up. So I think it's all around good. But I guess we'll move on to ad nauseum tendrils, or I guess PNT maybe, whatever the current name for this version is.
Yeah, I haven't heard what people call it, but I've been liking Pat. Just peer into the abyss, PA, and then tendrils.
Yeah, I think just for ease of use, I'm going to leave it as Ant for now.
Yeah, it just wouldn't be able to be in this column if it wasn't Ant, so it would have to be like, in column S or something.
Yeah, this is a matchup that's significantly worse for Turbo as opposed to some of the other variants like Bug, where Ant just has a lot more game, and a lot of different sideboard options have been tried over the years to almost universally mediocre results. People were running Sphere effects and Thorn of Amethyst and things like that for a while, and it's just there's really no great way to attack it outside of, I mean, like you can go like really hard on the graveyard effect, but if they peer and draw half their deck, they're really not going to need their graveyard to kill you. So part of the problem with the Sphere effects in the past were their answers to your combo just dovetail right into answering your spheres. So you kind of get into this spot where they're bringing in Echoing Truth and Chain of Vapor, and you're trying to beat them with a sphere, where they'll just, at the end of your turn, if you haven't comboed, they're just going to use their answer to your combo to bounce your sphere and then untap and kill you. So it's almost like you just YOLO the combo to try and get their bounce spells out of their hand, but that's not great either. So I don't run those cards for those reasons, but what we're kind of left with is the graveyard hate to kind of shut them off one of their primary paths with the Past in Flame stuff. Occasionally, like rip their Infernal Tutors out with Surgical, that kind of thing. And then Veil of Summer is pretty good. And Oof's just solid.
So we're kind of like, you're both combo decks that have discard spells and some amount of interaction for the other combo deck, be it you have graveyard interaction to stop the Past in Flames deterministic route, and then they have access to bounce spells, and then but the way you guys kind of like develop and execute differently. And would you say like some amount of edge is given to the fact that they're able to play cantrips?
Yes. Yeah. At the end of the day, we're drawing cards like Elvish Spirit Guide and not of this world, which is another thing. Like, how much protection do you actually keep in post board? And Needle, especially game one, which some of the versions don't even have Wish Claw. Some are still on Dark Petition, but even if they have Wish Claw, Needle is really narrow to the point of almost being a mulligan when it shows up. And anything that they have doesn't really get categorized as that. Plus, they have all of the cantrips to regulate their draws, and which is kind of brutal because basically the only way we fight them game one is with this card, and you can't fight the top of their deck or cantrips into the top of their deck or hiding the cards and then going off that way. So I would say Ant's kind of favored in the matchup.
Okay, so I see the sideboard you have outlined here. So you discussed the cards that we're bringing in. Taking out Caracas, no real legendaries to bounce. The four needles, as you explained, is just Wish Claw Talisman that you're looking to be able to name. I guess, like, in theory, if like we had complete duds and you had to leave a needle, like maybe you could get away with trying to name a fetch lane or something if you got lucky in that department. But all in all, just not what you want to be doing. So it seems like the last two cuts are the ones that maybe can be contestable. The trimming a scrying and a Not of This World, right?
Yeah, so the needle of fetch land play is particularly bad in a deck that's running 4 Urborgs versus the primary
Oh yeah, that's
blacklist.
true.
So there's
Right.
many games where, the Urborg just has to come out for you to have early lines to try and kill them, and yeah, it makes that line laughable. I mean, it can still cut them off a blue, maybe given certain draws, or red for the Past in Flames given certain draws, but yeah, I don't want to be naming fetch lands if at all possible.
Mhm. So besides the scrying and Not of This World, I think the only other thing I would consider cutting is the Sajuri step.
So
But the step with crop rotation and reclaimer gives you like protection against the like chain of vapor.
yeah,
But what I'm not sure about is like, is that safer than having the Not of This World in your deck?
so so I guess the rationale for that is if you keep the Not of This World, you now have 3 Not of This Worlds as answers to their 4 bounce spells. If you keep the step in the deck, you have 2 Not of This Worlds, 4 crop rotations, and a reclaimer. So it's basically 7 protection spells versus 3 protection spells, and
Mm-hmm.
the Not of This World does literally nothing else in the matchup. So I think having the increased density of protection against the bounce, plus kind of like what you alluded to with the Aloran, sometimes just having an extra land that you can throw into play, even if you're forced to, in a bad situation that can be moved away later, isn't the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. Um, okay, that makes sense. Another thing is, I understand you kind of want to be fast in the matchup, but you're also kind of fighting discard battles. Could it be possible that cutting one of, say, like the Elvish Spirit Guides for one of those 2 cards can also make sense? Or I'm guessing the speed just matters that much.
I think the speed matters, and the Spirit Guide in particular is really kind of like, it happens more than you would think that people walk into a tapped out board play that just completely obliterates them. So the Spirit Guides not only give you crop rotation bog if they go for a Past in Flames kill that they think is deterministic because you're tapped out, it also gives you Elvish Spirit Guide Veil of Summer if they
Mm-hmm.
go for like a Natural Tendrils or something like that. So
Yeah.
I think the speed aspect of it that you mentioned, plus the blowout potential, I think is because a lot of people, if you have like say 3 cards in your hand, they're just like, well, if they have Elvish Spirit Guide Veil, even if they consider it, like so be it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it has value there too.
Okay. And then the the last Not of This World is not, or the third one is not better than cutting the third scrying, because I'm guessing that just makes our deck like not dense enough. Like every time we're drawing 2 Not of This Worlds, it's not very good. But if we just have 2 Not of This Worlds and then any
Yeah,
other combination of cards, we're a lot happier.
yeah.
I like generic.
So for the tutor slots, I've run everywhere from 8 between Bug and Turbo. I've run anywhere from 8 to 14 tutor effects, depending on the lists. And I found that the sweet spot's somewhere in like the 9 to 10 range for a deck that wants to be dedicated. Like if you're going with like backup mid range plans like slow depths or something, it's different. But if you are dedicated to the combo, I think you really want to be in the 9 to 11 range. So I think going down to 8 is fine in certain matchups. If you go down to 7, you're really kind of hamstringing yourself a little bit, especially in a discard mirror where you're likely to lose 1 or 2 along the way, especially crop rotation, because crop rotation just doesn't represent the combo. It represents shutting off one of their primary lines to victory. So if you can just pretty much pencil it in, and sometimes Ant boards in a copy or two of Flusterstorm too. So if you can pencil in not having a tutor work, the first tutor work, and you only have 7 in the deck, yeah, you're really kind of tempting fate. I mean, you'll get away with it in the games where you just draw the combo lands or just happen to draw a couple of tutors, but I think there's some softness there, and Ant's the kind of deck that if you give it any kind of time, like you can't play an 8 or 9 turn game against Ant and not have them find a way to do something devastating off the
So could there be a point at which you would just want to board out 2 Novice Whirl and leaving 4 Scrying, like just kind of taking your lumps against the bounce spells? You do have a decent amount of discard. It could be hard for them to leave up both, like keeping bounce spell in their hand and trying to go off in the face of, you know, what you have going on, and drawing specifically 2 Novice Worlds without like they're allowed to just discard all the other cards because, as you mentioned, like just not being necessarily as threat dense. Could we want to go down to 1 Novice World?
Yeah, I think that would be a reasonable thing to do. The one thing that worries me is that on the draw especially, is that they're bringing in, if they do bring in a Flusterstorm or 2, they're also bringing in some number of Veils as well. So there are going to be games where our discard just doesn't necessarily hit, and having some alternative protection that doesn't involve hitting them with this card I think is nice.
Well,
but
so
yeah, I could definitely see the
like,
argument. I think that's close, whether you would want to have the 9th tutor versus the 2nd Not of This World. I think that's pretty close.
Well, if you can like anticipate what the plan is in terms of like Veil of Summer, Flusterstorm, or whatever leans the percentages the other way, could that mean that you just want 2 Not of This Worlds out on like one of them on the play and then 1 and 1 on the draw, or like the other way around?
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it's close. I guess the argument, the argument where you would want 2 on the play is for the games where you just have, you know, this deck has a lot of natural turn 2s, whether it's Stage Depths and a couple of acceleration pieces, or Urborg Depths Hex Mage, or Urborg Depths Spirit Guide Crop Rotation. Like, it has a lot of different variations of turn 2s. So on the games on the play where you have the turn 2, like,
you don't need as many scryings.
You don't need the scryings, but also Ant isn't, you know, Ant's the slower Storm, well, at least compared to TES, it's the slower Storm version. So a lot of times just a turn 2 combo is good enough versus them. But it could get blown out by the bounce spell specifically, where you can just try to kill them on turn 2 on the play, like going into your turn 3 if you have the Not of This World. So having the 2nd, I think, has some value there. But like I said, I think it could go either way in my mind.
Yeah, but like on the draw, since you're kind of locking into a slightly longer game, and by slightly longer I mean turn 3 or turn 4.
These games do drag out a little bit. It's not always a turn 3 or turn 4 thing.
Yeah, it probably scales with the amount of discard spells drawn on both sides.
Yeah, I can see that. I think I like
it. It is cool, like how, like, even though it sounds like it's not the most favorable matchup, what you do have going for you is kind of like the density of your cards. Like, you just need 2 cards to kill. Meanwhile, they need like chaining, like all these things, like a many spell turn. So that is cool when you're playing like discard spells back and forward. But you're also playing more lands, and they're playing like rituals instead of those lands. It's kind of a wash.
Yeah. All right, so next deck's sort of also a Storm deck. This is a particularly fun matchup where you just cross your fingers if they win the die roll, or any game that they're on the play, really, because we more or less have no interaction whatsoever. So one of the things I've discussed with some people in this matchup that's different from when this was originally made is they're often on Echo of the Eon versions at times at this point. So their graveyard occasionally is relevant as far as whether or not Surgical would be worthwhile taking LEDs out of their deck, kind of a situation. And I'm not really sure where I fall on that. I think when we're on the draw, I think it probably is worth it because we have so many cards that don't do anything, and we're not going to get to play Magic in the whatever percentage of the games they just win on turn one, or virtually win on turn one. So that's probably something that needs to get changed.
Yeah, with this being such a polarized matchup, on the play, you probably win a very large percent of your games where you just play turn one discard spell.
Yeah, or turn one Needle on Belcher is also basically buries them unless they're in on exactly Empty the Warrens.
Yeah, so game one, I kind of just want our plan to be very lean, very consistent, and understanding that 2020 isn't actually like it's how the game ends, but it's not when the game is actually over. So yeah, I think having different plans on the play and draw matters a lot.
Okay, so that obviously needs to get changed then, because previously it was just a one-size-fits-all thing. So basically, so my initial thought is just bringing in the 2 additional surgicals when we're on the draw.
Yeah.
I don't see anything else that's really particularly relevant. So I guess the question is, what are the additional cards that come out on the draw?
Let's see. Are we allowed to board out a Reclaimer?
Yeah, I think that's really bad here. I think that's 1.
Can we board out like Ghost Quarter?
I don't think we want to go to a 3rd land because we're already boarding down to 21 lands.
So it's rough for crop rotation.
Yeah,
okay.
That's a little hard. Maybe this is the exception to what we were talking about in the last match, where maybe it is okay to have 7 tutors, because they're never interacting with our tutors.
Yep.
Ever. So maybe it's just a scrying.
Scrying.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm in for that.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much else going on in that particular matchup. I think that's pretty straightforward. So, Black-Red Reanimator. So this is another matchup where, hopefully you win the die roll in game 1, because otherwise it's probably going to be painful, unless they're on some kind of looting draw, or just have, I guess, if their turn 1 reanimation is into Chancellor of the Annex, that's the kind of game that we'll win too.
Yeah, they're kind of just doing everything better than us in this matchup.
At least faster. They're better. They have smaller creatures. It's not better.
Yeah.
7/7s aren't better than 20/20s. Having Gristlebrand chump block is one of my favorite things in Magic. So, one of the weird things I was doing in the past here is bringing in an extra copy of Veil Summer on the draw. One really weird thing that comes up every now and then is Elvish Spirit Guide with Veil protecting surgicals or protecting things like that. But it's relatively marginal, but I just think we have worse cards in the matchup.
Do they have any interactive cards for the 2020? So
generally it depends on the list. Like, it used to be, like, if you go way back, it used to be Tide Spout Tyrant. More the last year or so, it's mostly Ashen Rider, because they usually have a couple of copies of Cabal Therapy too, which is just brutal. So even if you can protect it the first time, they just sack it to Therapy and get it the second time, or just leave it there to block if you have to use the step to protect it the first time.
So do you kind of just take your lumps against Ashen Rider and just proceed?
So I have beaten Ashen Rider with Veil, and I have beaten Ashen Rider with Step, because it's basically not always as simple as they get to reanimate it when your Lodge is in play. Sometimes they have to do it into your combo on the table and point the first activation at your land, or that kind of thing, and then you make it in response. And then if they don't have the Therapy, you can still Sejiri Step right through it. you can still veil the trigger after it blocks its graveyard. You do have some options, assuming you can't just stop the thing from getting into play to begin with, which is usually the preferred method. So outside of Ashen Rider, you'll sometimes, depending on the pilot, sometimes you see 0, sometimes you see 1. A couple of times recently I've seen 2 copies of Magus of the Moon that they bring in out of the sideboard, which is particularly annoying because it's very easy for them to play that on the second turn off of a Dark Ritual and a Red Source, or Lotus Petal and 2 lands, or there's a variety of ways they can get to that thing coming down. So yeah, there's hands that you just can't mulligan because you have hard graveyard hate plus, a turn 2 combo on the draw or something along those lines, and then they just power out of Magus of the Moon, and and there's really, I'm not willing to board in Abrupt Decay in the matchup. I just don't think it does enough. Like, maybe you get lucky and hit an Animate Dead with the trigger on the stack, but that's basically it. Those are the 2 uses. Unless you want to hit like an exposed Lotus Petal or something like that, I don't think the card does enough to really justify fighting a Magus of the Moon that may or may not be there.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, us bringing in Abrupt Decay is actually very similar to them bringing in Wear Tear. It's just like, it's very narrow and it's not going to matter a lot. You're playing a matchup with discard spells. It's just not worth it. Just try to go for your plan A and just concede the times that they both chose to put in their sideboard and have it out.
Yeah. So
okay, so on the play, I understand boarding out the Ghost Quarter. The Novelist Worlds would only really counter the Ashen Rider, which you explained was not very effective. And then it seems like Scrying is kind of like the go-to card to cut. Like, it's not going to be crop rotation, and Reclaimer, just being able to leave up 2 mana to threaten a Bog, for instance, is already very potent. So it's like Reclaimer ends up leaning closer to crop rotation than it does to Sylvan Scrying, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of turns where you have to leave up 1 mana to just keep them honest, essentially, just to threaten crop rotation or to threaten Veil or whatever you need to do. And it's just so much easier to cast a Reclaimer. Like, if you, on your first turn, if you just go land and use a Spirit Guide to Reclaimer, or just use the land Reclaimer and keep the Spirit Guide up, depending on whether you're buffing or not. If you just use a Spirit Guide to power up the Reclaimer, then it's active on turn 2. There's never really a window in the first 2 or 3 turns where you can safely Scrying, unless your hand happens to have a bunch of acceleration. So in the really fast matchups, I would default to Scrying being the first cut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is a little bit interesting to me that we aren't willing to have another Veil of Summer on the play. Mostly because, like, I understand you get value out of the Elvish Spirit Guide, Veil of Summer, your discard spell on the draw. But on the play, we can get value of land go, and then Veil of Summer you.
So it's not that the Veil's necessarily worse, because obviously on the play, the Veil's very good against their discard. The issue is the cut. So similar to the other matchups, I don't want to go down to 7 tutors in a discard matchup. So the extra cut on the draw is Needle, which is not great on the draw because obviously if they just have the nuts or power through you, they're drawing 7 to 14 cards if Gristlebrand comes in. When we're on the play, Needle naming Gristlebrand really limits their options because we can just straight up beat or erase a turn 1 Gristlebrand with a lot of hands if they can't draw off of it. So I think the Needle is extremely powerful on the play, and that's the cut on the draw. So I would be perfectly happy running a second Veil on the play, but I don't know what the cut is.
I think the only other card I could think of is one of the fast mana cards, but it seems like that can just end up with you being like glutton on Veils.
Yeah.
Instead of like killing your opponent, but I don't know.
Yeah,
it just feels kind of weird.
I fully acknowledge that it was odd looking at the beginning, but I couldn't come up with a good solution that I was satisfied with, so that's the way I left it.
Mm.
It's odd, but the matchup is just so fast that the needle's value play draw is totally different.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's any other spots. No, I'm good with this.
All right. So I'm sorry we have to do this, but Bug Delver. Do you have any Delver experience?
No. Well, the real problem is that you broke out the different Delvers, so we have to do this so many times.
uh, there's new Delver lists too, right?
I don't know.
There's a
I haven't.
mono. There's a mono blue Delver list.
Jeez.
They have
Yeah,
the
as may or may not be to your surprise, I think I've literally played like two matches of Legacy in the last like 3 years or 2 years or something.
you've played hundreds of virtual matches where you got to play from both sides and commentary. So
Yeah, but it's not quite the same. But yeah, so Bug Delver. Let's see what these lists look like nowadays. Do you want to bring it up? That way they could see it too.
yeah, I can bring it up.
So pretty much the Delver decks usually have very similar tools, but nowadays the blue-green ones kind of Oko. Um, Brazen Borrower is obviously in most of the Delver decks due to being blue. And then, we don't really see the edicts and truths that we used to see before that we alluded to in the beginning of the stream.
Yeah, Depths always has the option of going fetch land heavier and running Dryad Arbor if that's really a thing. That used to be a common angle to shoot for when Grixis Control was like a major player in the format, and you could count on them having a couple of edicts, and there were some other decks when Liliana the Veil was more of a played card, and so there were definitely formats where Delver decks were also running Edict and Grixis Control was running Edict, and there was some other of that kind of effect floating around where that kind of plan was worth it. But yeah, that hasn't really been the case in a while. You'll occasionally see like a Liliana's Triumph, but yeah, it's kind of the exception and not the rule nowadays.
Yeah, so the Delver decks, like general tools, are the same in the matchup. So they have Wasteland, Brazen Borrower, the random sideboard cards that we talked about. Where Bug Delver ends up being allowed to be different is that since it's a green Delver deck, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to have Oko. The thing that I think is the most interesting is like there used to be the old Bug Delver decks that would play a ton of like Hymn to Torox, which would slant the matchup a lot differently, combined with maybe like Thoughtseize or other discard spells. Here you see four Thoughtseizes and one Hymn. Um, they get to play more forces these days if they want to. So some other Delver variants are going to play two Force of Negations. Here we see a Drown and a Force of Negation. But the thing that I think is always the most interesting to me about Bug Delver is how mid-range it tries to be, in that its clock is just not particularly like consistent being fast. Like it's very night and day the hands that has Delver versus those that it doesn't, because it's not like say the old Nimble Mongoose or Hex Drinker, like you don't, or Monster Swift Spear of old. Just you're not overloading on the one drop department. Then you have Tarmogoyf, which might not even be like, it might just be a 2/3 like a decent amount of the time. It's not accruing the same advantage that Dreadhorde Arcanist does. It's not producing a fast board like Young Pyromancer does. And it's not presenting a weird enough threat like Bitter Blossom that actually indirectly uh, has a good matchup against Dark Depths. So, or Merit Lage in particular. So, due to the clock being slower, we can kind of anticipate these plans where, okay, our hand's going to be under duress, but there's going to be these large subsets of games where the game's actually kind of dragging out. One other thing that Bug gets over the other builds of Depths is that it gets to play Abrupt Decay instead of cards like well, it's like abrupt decay or braid, like these things that are going to interact with needle. So that's something we have to be aware of. But luckily, our veils can hit those too.
Yeah, and those fortunately, at least in this list, aren't really seeing a ton of play. We just see the one decay. And that's really it in the 75.
Okay, and we see like a submerge here, and that's kind of a spot where, like, sure, some subsets of the time it's going to be like, yeah, we're going to go for it because we think it's just like probabilistic that's going to be good. Maybe like if we see the submerge, that's obviously different, but in general, any blue deck can in theory play submerge, and a lot of it seems like it's going to come down to how your hand's shaking up, how the clock's going, and stuff like that. Just you like sometimes you just have to make them have it. But I think this particular style of Delver, you probably have enough time to just check off all the boxes, including the submerge one.
Yeah, so I guess it's a double-edged sword. Like one of the things that's different about this list from the depth side is they have so much. They have basically the same amount of counter magic, or very similar amounts of counter magic, but then they have the discard on top of it. So your resources are really going to be strained. So you're not always going to be able to perfectly time the crop rotation to get rid of your forest. Sometimes you're just going to get kind of backed in, and that kind of plays against what you're saying. Like they kind of go like in two different directions. So you're gonna have a little bit more time, but your resources are also under more strain. So I think some games you'll be backed into a corner, but other times you'll be able to draw out of it. But
Mm-hmm.
if I could choose, I would choose to play against Rogue all day as opposed to playing against this. Like
Mm-hmm.
I just find that
Lightning Bolt Dreadhorde Arcanist is easier to deal with.
well, I don't like Dread Arcanist either, but I feel like you can back Rug into corners a little bit easier than you can with this because your resources in your hand are your resources in your hand, and you can like kind of plot out how the next 2 to 3 turns are going to go specifically to the point where like I know that I can basically play this discard spell into Daze on purpose just
Mm-hmm.
to delay Dreadhorde Arcanist a turn. And you can sort of do the same thing here to delay Tarmogoyf, but you're not really going to do that. And then when a Thoughtseize comes back in the other direction and wrecks your plan for the following turn, you know, it's kind of like it's a little bit more variance as to what's coming off the top of the deck than Rug, where you can pretty much know where you're going to be on any given turn.
Yeah, that's just generally what's going to happen with blue black base Delver decks. Like what you're saying kind of like echoes what a lot of say like combo oriented players would say also. Just like combining your counter magic with discard is kind of like one of the best recipes.
Yeah, Hymn Torak in particular too. I mean, that's one of the few side effects of Veil that I actually like, is that this card sees significantly less play because from a land space combo deck, like one of the single worst things that can happen is, you know, you're on the draw or something and you get hymned and it just rips your combo pieces out, or you know, with turbo depths in particular, actually a lot of the depth shells, but turbo depth is bad. A lot of the black green amount of aces are just really bad, so just losing a colored source or a combo piece is just crippling in certain spots. So
All right, so how do you propose we sideboard?
so most of the Delver sideboard plans are just really basic. You know, a lot of we really don't want to shave on too much acceleration because Daze is a card, and it's just very nice to be able to play around it. So I sometimes you have to because there's really nothing else to shave against the Wasteland deck. Like you just can't shave needles, so that's a non-starting point. You really don't want to be shaving more than one land against the Wasteland deck. So you want all the tutors, especially against Bug with this card. So you're really kind of limited as to where you could go or how deep you can go to add cards. So I try to just keep it minimal. I think the Veils are decent against their discard and the couple of bounce spells that they have, and counter magic just to force a key tutor through. And I think the decays are fine to blunt their clock even further to stretch the game out. But other than that, there aren't a lot of cards I really want in the matchup, so just trying to keep it minimum.
So hmm, the only other cards I would consider removing are like Elvish Reclaimer or Not of This World, but it's hard because you like need the interaction to be able to fight. Like if Brazen Borrower didn't exist, then maybe you can get away with cutting like a Not of This World, but the fact that it's so ubiquitous means that you just have to.
Yeah, the one argument you can make is, since I'm doing the same thing with the Veil and splitting the uses. Um, the one thing you could do is you could argue that Veil is basically Not of This World against their blue cards.
And better against their
discard. Yeah. So with the downside being 1 mana is really, really important against the deck with soft counters. So, that's a place that I could get to, I think, fairly easily. I think that's close.
Yeah. So like also on the draw, I feel like you're gonna try to take the game even slower from them having days on the play, like just the overall like tempo of the game.
Yeah.
And when you're on the draw, you have that extra card or half a card depending how you want to view play and draw. So I feel like you're probably going to end up in spots where you can wait longer, which means that like sure, it would be nice if you had Not of This World, but Veil just being kind of like a counter spell or buying you time to set up, and like I understand that the mana is kind of taxing, but since they're not the fastest Delver deck, I feel like the game can last longer enough from them playing Bug that you can utilize the second Veil over the Not of This World on the draw.
Yeah, I can see that.
But what it sounds like to me is that specifically on the play, your speed mattering enough is enough of a concession that like these like the pedal in particular is what we're the pedal or spirit guide instead of they're Not of This World is kind of like the contention there.
Yeah.
Like I guess it's really just on the play. I don't know. I feel like I might also cut a Not of This World on the play for one of those, but
yeah, I think that's fine.
Like, yeah, it's not like we don't have protection, and by being on the play, our mana's not necessarily as taxed in the same way. Like, we get to go time a lot sooner.
Yeah, I think
and just land go is like very good if they feel like the times that they don't have turn 1 Delver, I could see them just wanting to run a Thoughtseize out there instead of even playing a Ponder.
Yeah, I think the initial thought process behind leaving them all in there was on the play. They're often going to, a lot of Delver players will do things like subscribe to the theory that if you don't have a clock on depths, you're going to lose, essentially. Like they take that, like that's one of their main, positions. Yeah, more or less. So the number of players that tap out across all of the Delver variants that tap out on turn 2 for Tarmogoyf, Dreadhorde Arcanist, whatever, Sylvan Library, and the various matchups is pretty high. So you often get a window where you can jam, and it's nice to have that in case they have the Brazen Borrower. But the odds are, if you're going that early, you're not going to have additional mana to pay for like soft permission or a force within. Force will just get you anyway, or to pay for a Veil. So it doesn't actually really do all that much. Like you're kind of just Not of This World almost kind of like puts you in a spot where you just feel safe, but it may not actually be all that safe. It may just be better to play the game out a little longer anyway. So I think I like your change.
Yeah, and it's not like we don't have them in the deck. It's specifically like the way I kind of approach it is, do I ever want 2 in my hand? And I don't think I'd want that against the discard spell deck.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, I think we can skip Bug Control. I couldn't even find a list as far as
Get out of here.
anything going on. So this one's going to be pretty quick too. Burn is one of like the 3 or 4 best matchups for Turbo Depths.
They need this many cards to deal 20, and
yeah,
they need this many cards to deal 20.
Exactly. They're so much slower, and at most you'll see like a single copy of a Caracas or some older lists, and some players still do it, you'll see like ensnaring bridges, but burn doesn't always get to 3 lands all that often. Plus we have discard spells, and we're bringing in vigors and decays exactly for ensnaring bridge. It's just a really, really straightforward matchup. The needles and the step don't really do anything in the matchup, so those are just clean swaps.
So the safekeeper is just a concession to that.
It's
The
just,
fact that they might have Caracas.
well, the step doesn't do anything unless they show you something.
Sorry, the safekeeper.
Yeah. So it's just, you have 4 cards that don't do anything. We're not needling fetch lands. They could have Caracas, so I guess safekeeper, you're not really. It's basically just something that can stand in the way of an early creature or have them point a burn spell at it instead of your face. So it's just like something that buys a little bit more time than the alternatives.
The card I was considering instead was Sylvan Library. Like, if we're just discussing cards that like don't do anything, I can see a world where we play turn 1 discard spell. Like we just keep a hand that has one of the pieces for whatever reason. Maybe we mulligan a few times or something, but we could just end up in a spot where we play like turn 1 discard spell, turn 2 discard spells, like pedal out Sylvan Library, and then like my goal is not to take damage with it, but I think the card filtering aspect might be better than just 1/1 that we're hoping to chump block with.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just looking at the 3 cards and just never drawing, obviously, because we're playing versus burn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the reason that probably wouldn't come up a lot, I think what would do is give us looks to find vigor and decay if they do happen to land in a ensnaring bridge. But it's going to be very rare where we don't, like, this deck pretty much goldfishes to turn 3 with the London Mulligan whenever it wants to. So there's going to be very few games where we have to dig to anything other than the exact games where they have bridge and we didn't hit it with a discard spell and they got to 3 mana and we don't have any of the 4 answers. So that's a really pretty small subset of games.
But like, is that better than the safekeeper? Like,
well, what the safekeeper is it's a sponge, so it's probably saving you 3 damage. They're either going to point a spell at it or it's going to stand in the way of two at the worst. It'll stand in the way of a Goblin Guide.
So if that's the logic, it sounds like you should just bring in the Collector Roof then, because at least that like threatens the trade.
I think the turn cycle is a little bit of a difference, right? So on the first turn, if we don't have a discard spell, we could just throw that thing out there and let it get incinerated, like lightning bolted or just block or whatever.
Definitely don't get incinerated.
On turn 2, incinerated the effect, not the card. Whatever. They could point something at it or it could block. On turn 2, we're often going to be doing something else. We're either going to be comboing off with the Hex Mage or with the lands plus crop rotation and an accelerant, or we're going to be casting Sylvan Scrying to set up the turn 3. So I think there's less hands where we could just play a 2-drop and just, even the natural combo, even if we're just keeping Urborg Hexmage or Urborg Depth Stage, just having the 3-land combo, we're not gonna have a green source unless we have an accelerant to even play that thing. So the windows, I think there's less windows where we can just throw an oof into play, and Safekeeper, if they let it live, does randomly protect against Caracas if they do have it. Or I think somebody in the chat mentioned Dead Gone. It's been I don't think I've seen Dead Gone out of burn, but I guess it's possible. So I don't know. You might be right, but I think
or just like keeping the step. Like,
well, I don't think the step does anything unless we're getting back into the just having the extra land argument.
Or like the Dead Gone thing.
Yeah.
But
I think we're like really. I mean,
I'm not gonna fight. I'm not gonna fight hard.
It's really on the margins because this matchup is so favorable. Like, we're talking about like a subset of games where this one of could actually matter by trading with a Goblin Guide, or whether we should have the 24th land. Yeah, I don't.
Chad did mention that we could board out Caracas instead, but I think the, like, if we do see Dead Gone, maybe that's different, but I could see just like the untapped land just being more relevant, like
Yeah,
some
there's
really weird combinations of hands with like your Reclaimer and Sylvan Scrying. You just want land untapped.
yeah. Plus with the Elvish Spear Guide crop rotation scenario, it's not that weird. It's a surprising number of games come up where it's just Urborg, literally any land, Hexmage, Spirit Guide, crop rotation, where you just run the Hexmage out off the double black, off any untapped land, like you're saying, and then you're good to go. Or just float the 2 black, crop rotation, then play the Hexmage, however you want to do it, depending on what you're playing around. But yeah, the untapped land would come up with Reclaimer, it would come up with those kind of lines as well. So I don't believe the Karakas does much of anything in most of the matchups. You're not going to see a legendary creature, but
Yeah, well, you hope to see a legendary creature just
on their
side.
side. Yeah, I don't really want to be. Yeah, yeah. I guess we could cut it to avoid the misclick possibilities of bouncing our own 2020, right?
Yeah.
But James of Humans of Magic fame had a question regarding this matchup. He wanted to know whether or not Thoughtseize should be boarded out based on the damage. So I don't. I think hitting a potential answer such as Ensnaring Bridge is worth having it in there. I don't find that the life loss comes up all that often. We're usually significantly faster than them. Worst case scenario, it usually trades with a card at like a positive damage rate anyway. Like oftentimes you're going to be able to either hit a Fire Blast and still be up 2 life, or Price of Progress and still be up at least 2 life, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like Thoughtseize is actually just a dual card in the matchup. It's gain life, and then with the optionality to like lose 4 life to take their answer. Like its default mode is like gain life, and then it just gets better from there. Like losing life would be like, if we could lose life, that would be great.
Yeah, there's also on the draw. There's a subset of games where they play a turn 2 Eidolon, where we need to resolve at least 2, sometimes 3 spells to win on our second and third turn, where that thing represents 4 to 6 damage on the spells we're going to play, plus a swing in there as well. So yeah, being able to take something like that is also relevant.
Okay.
All right, it's been about a week since you got to commentate on a Depths versus Death Shadow match, so I feel like you should be pretty up on this one. This is kind of almost like a subsidiary of Delver.
Yeah, it's Weird Delver, so it's probably actually closest to Bug Delver out of all the other Delver variants. I'm also the kind of person that puts Infect in the Delver category too. It's the fastest Delver variant, but more on that later, I guess. So yeah, Death Shadow is interesting that it can produce a creature as big as a 2020 without shenanigans from say like Phyrexian Life, but their recipe for beating you is very similar to that of Bug Delvers, even if they're not able to have, say, Oko or Abrupt Decay. Like, it's still that it's discard spells with counter spells that are making it difficult. There's a lot of numbers that have fluctuated throughout the years in Death Shadow as to how many Wastelands they play, what types of removals spells they play also. But at the end of the day, I think you're probably happier seeing Death Shadow than you are Bug Delver. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, Shadow is, I think, an easier matchup than Bug Delver. I mean, their clocks can get fast depending on, there are certain hands where they'll essentially just get to a relatively low life total in the first couple of turns. And then suddenly what's normally like a 2-3 or a 3-4 Goyf out of Bug Delver is like an 8-8 Death Shadow or something like that. So they can definitely close the door faster, even when the versions that have Gurmag Angler, like they definitely get into spots where you feel like you have time and then you suddenly don't have time. So on that front, I think it can be a little bit off, but in general, the cards aren't, I don't feel as threatened in this matchup as I do in Bug Delver.
I am interested by not bringing the second Veil of Summer.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a space thing again. Like, I don't want to. I mean, this is probably the exact same thing as Bug Delver, right? Where
Yeah,
we
I'm
probably
gonna make
don't.
the same argument.
Yeah, I think I agreed with you the last time. I think I'm still going to agree with you. So I think we can just do 2 and rip out the second Not of This World. Like, it was basically the same.
Or the third Not of This World, or whatever. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's good. I guess we can kind of speed through some of these matchups that overlap to a certain degree.
Yeah, especially, the 7 different types of Delver.
Well, I think Infect is definitely significantly different. Like, there are cards.
Yeah.
There are cards that
that's
would not.
Actually the one, like, you probably want to play against that less than you would want to play against Bug Delver, I think.
I have much better results against Infect than Bug Delver.
There's also probably less good Infect pilots. Like the really good Infect players are really good.
Well, I feel like we have a lot of answers. Basically, there's only one card in their entire deck that I care about, and that's
Glistener Elf.
Not Glistener Elf. No, Glistener Elf does not line up very well against a deck that boasts first strikers and 3/4s and just puts them in positions where they have to just bleed pump spells to even be able to attack unless they have it all with the Berserk.
Blighted Agent.
Blighted Agent is the card that's the problem, yeah. So, oftentimes, like, it depends on the version. We can get to Infect later.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, it's an ABC order. We're almost there.
Yeah, we're in D. So depths is pretty wide ranging, but I kind of just lumped them all in together.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Unlike the Delver, I thought you would appreciate your preferred strategy to be given a lot more space.
My preferred strategy is really just Grixis Delver, though.
That's here. We'll get to that eventually. So
and even that, like as I mentioned earlier, I haven't really played much Legacy over the past few years, but I have been active through commentary and stuff. And something that chat might not know about me as a Magic player is I take a lot of pride in playing with more bad cards, or cards that aren't just produce the first time I cast a Siege Rhino was one of just the worst times for me in Standard. I just actually felt terrible because I felt like I don't directly correlate myself as a human to my Magic results, but when I'm playing certain types of formats or certain kinds of decks, I get a little bit of validation that when I win, it's probably because I was making good decisions, and when I lose, it's probably because I was making bad decisions. Yeah, exactly. Lingering Souls in your Jeskai decks. That's where it starts. So the older versions of Grixis Delver, I would shoehorn cards like Baleful Strix into it, Snapcaster Mage, all these cards that were bad in Grixis Delver. The card I can't stand right now, or the cards that I can't stand right now, are just Oko and Dreadhorde Arcanist. They're just not very tactful cards. I understand that they produce advantage. They're very powerful cards. You should be playing it. But that's not the kind of Magic I actually enjoy playing. I just feel like it's too trivial how you win a game with those cards in your deck. So I think the types of decks that I gravitate towards don't necessarily exist anymore.
Yeah, I could sort of relate to that.
Well, Terramander and Stifle are different. Those are bad in a different way. I like underpowered, flexible cards. I don't think Terramander or Stifle are either of those. Those are actually just bad. That's true. I do play Lingering Souls against Tom. He will help me out with Airborne. And I can block your 2020. Maybe I should just start working on Lingering Souls decks for Legacy.
Yeah, I played about a month ago. The Legacy Pit had a remote player series, and I had to play against a black-white deck that had all Lingering Souls and equipment and Hymnothorax and discard spells and Swords to Plowshares, and I was like, yeah, I was not sad to see this card see less play. I think I was blocked by Spirit Tokens 6 times, something like that. and I couldn't step through because the Jitte put them over 20. It was good times.
Yeah, I guess in theory they could play Kaya, the 3-mana one, to exile.
Oh, I've run into that too. Yeah,
it exiles it, right?
it does. Yes.
My did I ever tell you about like my Grixis Delver box? Like I have a Jeskai box and a Grixis Delver box, and it has every card I've like recently thought about playing before.
I did not know you had a Jeskai box.
Oh yeah, Jeskai box is way better than Grixis Delver box. Jeskai box has, let's see, let me think of the weirdest card besides Tidings, which is a pet card of mine. Magus of the Tabernacle is in there. Like Remand, which I would sideboard. Just all these really weird things. Grixis Delver box has like Electrolyze. Do you know what Dead Drop is?
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted Dead Drop after the Pro Tour that I did well, like Pro Tour 25th. Because if everyone else wanted to play like 3 or 4 True Names in their deck and Gurmag Angler, I wanted to be the one playing Dead Drop. And then it has also Sigbig Muck Dragger. Do you know that one?
That I am not familiar with.
It's like 8 and a black, Delve, 3/6. When it ETBs, you like Gravedigger.
Okay. I'm gonna have to look this up.
We got a sub.
Oh, I missed that. Did you actually catch it? I missed it.
It's in chat.
I do not have the chat up currently. I guess
what?
It used to be on the Streamlabs OBS. It used to be right on the side when I would go live.
It still is.
It's not on mine.
Oh, you can like configure it to get it back in there.
I do not know how to do that, unless you know how to do that.
We'll do it off stream.
There we go.
What you can do is you can also just like pop out Twitch chat. That way you only have it open. You don't have to worry about your video feed.
That is what I try to do, and normally that would be right at the bottom settings box on the Twitch, and the option just was not there on my Twitch page.
Oh no, I just chose not to answer the submerge question. Sorry.
What was the question?
They were just wondering about how easy it is to play around submerge as if it's Rug Delver. And like at the end of the day, it's just like a weighted risk. So like there are going to be times you're going to get them with your submerge, but it's usually because like their play had higher expectancy. So even though it doesn't feel like you're directly giving your opponent options, you are by like choosing to play submerge. Like just because you're going to get them sometimes means that it couldn't get better for them. So then you won like a very narrow range of games.
Yeah, there's also sub games from the depth side where you have to just sometimes decide, like basically what you're saying, just decide what you're better off against. Like say they have a flip Delver that they leave back, and you're going to be able to combo at the end of their turn or whenever you decide it's appropriate to do it, and you have a Bayou in your hand. And you also have a Sylvan Scrying, and say your last land left over after the combo is going to be, say, Urborg. So do you play the Bayou with the plan of scrying for step to go through the Delver, or do you sandbag there, just sit on the Bayou and decide you're not going to lose the Submerge, and then give them a full extra turn by just letting them block? Like you end up in these situations. You don't always have crop rotation, or you can wait until your turn, play the Green Source and crop it before they get priority. So there are situations where in the past, I think Submerge was trivial to play around from the depth side, because against Rogue Delver specifically, you could just, if you're talking 9 months or a year ago, whenever you got the first window to make the combo, you could just do it, and they basically couldn't beat you. They had 1 or 2 outs, like usually 1 or 2 bounce spells out of the sideboard. But now some of them have bounce or borrow or main, and then 3 Okos. So you can no longer just freely spam and never have the forest in play. Sometimes you have to push it through because you can't give them an extra turn to, especially with Dreadhorde out of Rug and stuff like that. Like you can't give them a turn where they're going to see 6 to 8 cards off of Ponders with the possibility of finding an answer in Oko. So like there are going to be situations where you're just going to have to accept that Submerge is going to get you. It's not like the good old days.
We'll get to the Rug Delver matchup eventually.
Eventually. That's a good call. So, Dark Depths. So, the best play if you're on Turbo Depths is to just not get paired against Dark Depths because you are by far the worst variant versus every other Depths variant. The mirror is fine, obviously, if you know what you're doing, but it's a dog to slow depths, it's a dog to bug depths, it's a dog to white depths, every other depths imaginable. You do not want to be playing versus those decks with turbo. They're just...
How about that, like, that deck that existed for one tournament? It was like Naya Depths or something.
Yeah,
like
that's kind of like... That was kind of like an offshoot of the green-white version. Those were like kind of doing somewhat similar things. Yeah, that deck was just misery to play against when that existed for a short window of time. So let's just not mention it and pray it never makes its way back into Legacy.
All right, so what's the plan sideboarding in this matchup?
So this is kind of just like a really, really rough outline because obviously there's differences.
Yeah, I kind of figured.
There's obviously differences in the shells. But at its core, like, you're unlikely to win super early. So you can shave on some of the acceleration just because these decks are going to have just so many ways to blow you out. So right off the bat, every one of them is going to have 4 crop rotations. So you know that if you're just going to go Urborg Depths combo, you're likely either going to eat a Wasteland, eat a Caracas, just eat a Ghost Quarter, something along those lines that just isn't going to end well. So unless you actually have seen their hand, so unless you like have the actual, best hand of turn 1 discard spell into turn 2 combo, or turn 2 combo with Not of This World, unless you have something like that, it's very unlikely you're going to win in the first couple of turns. And it's really hard to expose your depths and put it in play, period, because they're also running Thespian stages. So, like, you never want to put yourself into a position where they might be able to copy your depths. So a lot of the games work out where the first person to put the depths into play loses. So that's kind of why you usually shave 1 or 2.
But it seems like there's still a little bit of tension there because you claim like your build isn't good in the late game either.
Yeah, so that's kind of like in its worst matchups, that's going to come up over and over again. Like, you're a dog in the long game, but you're unlikely to win in the short game. So, and that's kind of like similar to D&T, when we're going to get to it soon, as a brand new, never before added to this guide, Esper Vial. There's just some of these decks just have so many ways to interact with you that you're just kind of in a bad spot. So you're kind of trying to thread the needle, and that's kind of where it is for depths. Like, you're trying to stick something that can protect your combo on both ends. So you kind of need your needles, even though the games, especially in the Turbo Depths mirror, like, needle games devolve into like 2/2s and 3/4s attacking and 2 on first strikes with step tricks, because somebody will needle a Hex Mage because they think that's the only way the opponent can beat them by comboing early, and then the other person will needle stage and then there is no way to remove those in game 1 from the board.
With all of our needles combined.
Yeah, so the needles end up just preventing, like, I've literally had many depths mirrors that it's race to 30 mana to see who can thaw out the depths first, or who can make the other player waste their Ghost Quarter first, their 1 Ghost Quarter first, or that gets needled too, and then it's just like a straight out, it's bad. But what you're really trying to do is have as many protection mechanisms. So Sylvan Safekeep is a really important card, just to cut out their Caracas lines. Can also protect your Reclaimer, which is really important.
It seems like there's no efficient way for them to kill it.
Yeah, other than just, sinkholing you. They can point to gaze and stuff at it, but that's kind of fine.
But they only have so many of those.
Exactly. So the problem against the slower versions is all of the devastating cards they have more copies of. So, like, we have 1 Sylvan Library, like Slow Depths will often have multiple copies of Sylvan Library or Dark Confidant. We have 1 copy of Reclaimer, which is one of the best cards in the mirror. They have 3 or 4 copies of Reclaimer. So it's you're kind of in these spots where, you're just trying to do the best that you can. So you're bringing in cards that are just generically good that you're hoping are going to push you through their disruption, whether that's decays for their needles or claimers, whatever it ends up being. Safekeepers for their Caracas, and removal. The library, because they often don't really pressure you effectively either, so sometimes we can draw, and then the veils for discard, and then just shaving down on the cards that aren't great. We don't want to overload on discard and the discard mirror, where the other side's running a land-based combo too, so duress isn't particularly effective, unless you know they're on like a variant. Like most versions don't have Life from the Loam, but as long as you don't see Life from the Loam, Bog's fine. The Last Depths is fine. Not of This World. The problem with Not of This World is, one, they can rip it out of your hand with discard spells, and two, you have to, it doesn't beat their key cards. So if they're sitting behind Crop Rotation or a Wasteland or a Ghost Quarter or whatever in play, Not of This World doesn't do anything until after you can already combo.
Right. It's more of the fighting is before the 2020 is made, not after the 2020. And
usually, you'll occasionally run into players that will be greedy, but it's hard to know that in advance. Like, you'll steal a game here and there because they let your combo resolve, thinking they can Crop Rot into Caracas and bounce it and then lose to an Out of This World. But that's kind of more like praying as opposed to, anticipating what's likely to happen.
Yeah. I feel like if I didn't see this, I would probably come to similar conclusions, except I would probably leave in a duress instead of the third Not of This World.
Okay. Yeah, I think there needs to be some... Yeah. I guess
like the value of being able to hit a Sylvan Library when you're explaining that that's one of the more key cards in the matchup seems better than the times that your 2020 is getting interacted with.
Yeah, I think my problem with duress is that it's good at hitting specific cards, but not all of the right specific cards. Like the turn 1 duress misses a bunch of their early turn plays that are all key. Like it misses the Reclaimers, it misses the Dark Confidants, it misses the Hex Mages. Like it's just, if you're to run it, you have to run 7 or 8 discard spells when they're probably going to have Veils too. And
I'd rather have my duress get veiled than my Thoughtseize also.
True. I could see it on the play. On the draw, it's kind of sketchy.
Well, it also seems like Petal could be better. Not of This World just seems really bad to me.
Okay.
Just because so much of the fighting is about the board pre-2020.
Yeah, I suppose that's fair.
So I don't really care if it's duress or Petal. I just really don't like that they're Not of This World.
Yeah, I don't think the Petal is likely to push it over the top. I think the game is just likely... if we're going with the theory that the game is likely to drag out a little bit, the Petal is very unlikely to really do the damage. All right, from one difficult matchup to another. Mm-hmm. This is traditionally... would you buy the argument that D&T is not playable anymore, so we don't have to cover it?
The only things that are inevitable are deaths and taxes.
It's true. So this is another matchup where we're extremely unlikely to win early unless things break perfectly. So between their 4 Wastelands, 3 Caracas, 4 Swords to Plowshares, and since we're talking post-board, they usually have 1 to 2 extra copies of Path to Exile as well, to say nothing of Flicker Wisps off Vial and any secondary stuff that people may or may not have, like Tomic.
They can play weird things like Sarah Vendor to block for a turn.
Yeah, Tomic's more of a
Tomic,
thing. Yeah. I've seen Council's Judgment, which can be annoying against the X-Mage draws. They've got quite a bit of play, so my generic strategy is some of the acceleration, since I don't think we're going to win early very often. The Bog, because I don't think it does anything in the matchup, as the extra land that can go, and Duress. Duress is okay in certain situations, but
against the creature base like
Yeah,
interaction and the
so
lands.
so the number of times when I used to, well, still in game ones and stuff, number of times I've cast duress and it like legit bricks against DNT is a
A
percentage of the
delight.
time that yeah, it's a delight. But it happens a percentage of the time that I'm not comfortable with. Like, it's definitely, you could make the argument that it's okay on the play post board because you theoretically strip a vial, you can still hit Plow's Path, that kind of thing. Um, but what it ends up doing more often than not in game one is sitting there until Stoneforge Mystic comes down and then ripping the equipment out of their hand. Which just, I mean, there's some value there, but I just don't think it's as. I think it's the first. It's the first one to the bench to try and make room for some more high impact cards. Like, I don't think. I think all of the discard that can take creatures is better. I don't think, since this is a matchup, we're almost always going to need to tutor for Ghost Quarter to help with the rest of our stuff, since Needle by itself isn't usually enough, since they have multiple land-based hate cards and other issues.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm
there's
good
really,
with the sideboard plan.
yeah, there's really nowhere else to go. So it's just generic removal for some of their stuff, safekeepers to protect against all their nonsense. And I guess the one questionable spot on the way in is Oof. It basically doesn't really do much against Batterskull, but it stops Jit and it stops the Vial. So it's not
Yeah,
particularly great.
like stopping Vile is actually like pretty good though because it innately like makes Flicker Wisp less of a threat, and it also doesn't allow them to like port or leave up Wasteland or leave up Karak. It's like allows you to have more play in the matchup, and it's like pretty low opportunity cost for you to play one. Chad asks, how do you rate Library versus Death and Taxes? Like intuitively, like I'm just gonna answer first because I'm not the best player, and like this is me just like generally like trying to think about how I perceive Magic working. So a card like Library could work in that the game's going a little bit longer and allows you to like filter your draws through fetch lands. We don't have the most like shuffle effects, so we are looking for more like opportunities to take like damage and draw cards off of the library. However, and like Death and Taxes doesn't have the fastest clock, but the first cost is you're choosing to play a 2 mana card against a Thalia deck, which yeah we can like choose to accelerate it out, but then it's not really our MO. That's not really like what we're after. We like Tom kind of said how the games tend to drag out, but that's just because we need things to go well for us. The problem is like we might just be able to play higher impact cards that are like more compact is probably how I would put it. All right. What would you say, Tom?
I agree with all that. I think the other piece of it is, depending on the version, some of their clocks aren't necessarily that slow. Like, if you start seeing things like Mirran Crusader or
Oh wow.
or any of that kind of stuff, even just a Flicker Wisp. So if they go after your first one with a Flicker Wisp, that's not exactly a slow clock. So the only time the library really comes into play is if they hit you with exactly Swords to Plowshare, and then it's actually relatively good. But the issue is they have so many other cards. Like, they're bringing in Path. So the first time you get your Lodge Path with a Sylvan Library in play is, it's a unique experience.
It's the last time Sylvan Library is going to be in there.
Yeah, so there's so many hurdles, and I feel like the card is only high impact in two subsets of games. The one where we're on the play and we either get it under Thalia or accelerate it out with like a Spirit Guide or a Petal on turn one, and then we just have the opportunity to draw because we know their clock's not gonna, we just basically fill our hands for 2 turns, and then on turn 3 or turn 4 hope we have all the pieces and protection to fight through what they have. And then in the games where we get plowed, and there's enough games that don't fall under one of those two categories that I think it's reasonable to play it in the matchup. I just don't think it works out enough to do as much as I want it to in the slot.
The only thing I wasn't sure about, and like we've seen this earlier, and I didn't address it earlier because I thought it made sense there, but how do you decide that it's 2 petal, one Elvish Spirit Guide?
So generally, whenever you want the petals because obviously one can cast Hex Mage and the other can't.
Yeah,
So the
that's
petals
kind of
are
what I was thinking.
so the petals are better there. The matchups where I tend to go for more spirit guides are the ones where casting it is relevant. Like in the Turbo Depths Mirror, casting Elvish Spirit Guide is actually relevant, so I would rather have that than a petal there. The other matchup is where I want to steal games because the petal is just on
Face
board. They
up.
can see what you do. Yep, and the Spirit Guide is where you get them, and for better or worse, I've stolen a lot of games with it. I don't know what that says, but just my experience with it is that having the hidden mana is better, specifically, especially in a matchup where a big part of their plan is mana denial. So, when you're tapped out, a lot of players will take that opportunity to wasteland a combo piece or to wasteland the Urborg or something like that. So the Spirit Guide crop rotation kind of baits that to a certain degree, where they may not do it with the petal. And most people aren't very patient with their wastelands, but I would say 9 times out of 10, it's correct for the opponent to not wasteland you and just sit there, especially for a deck like D&T, like force us to get through it as opposed to just...
It takes more resources. Like, if they get rid of the depths, that first is only good the times you don't have another depths in your hand. Which, like, sure, like, you got me on that one. But, like, to combo into a wasteland, just leaving the wasteland up, and the fact that, you can have multiple, like, dead depths in hands, like that's a lot more taxing of a dance than like you would gladly be like, yeah, like I'll sacrifice this dark depths to kill your wasteland, I'll play this dark depths, or like just not to worry about that.
Yeah, and a lot of times they'll go after your mana. It's like just your colored sources too. They'll see you only have one green source, they'll go after that. They see you only have the Urborg for black, they're worried about Hex Mage, they'll go after that. So yeah, it's just I want more copies of that to have those lines come up more often, or have those options come up more often.
Yeah, specifically this matchup, the reason why I brought it up was because intuitively to me, besides the black mana requirement, I feel like I would want to cut 3 petals and leave in the Spirit Guides. Or the last Spirit Guide.
Yeah, so in the current list, there is 12 black sources outside of the petals. So we're starting with 16 black sources. If we cut 3 petals, we're down to 13. So more or less, it's unreasonable to ever expect to consistently cast the Hex Mage unless we have Urborg at that point. I'm not sure if 14 really sways it too much percentage-wise, but I think that's probably where my head was at.
Okay. It's just something I'd consider, but I'm not like I agree with the chunk of cutting 3 of these like temporary manas.
The Bog's coming out too, so it's actually 12. It would be 12 if we got the 3rd petal.
Yeah.
So that's
it's something I'm not going to fight hard about. It's just something I think the Hex Mage seems that much better.
Yeah, I think being able to cast Hex Mage is really important because not only is it like a combo piece, but in a D&T matchup specifically, it does so many other things. So
yeah, you can remove counters from their vial.
Well, that comes up in response to activating a lot. One of the other
because
things,
of like Flicker Wisp and stuff.
One of the other things that comes up a lot is our combo turn often coincides with the turn. Like we can often combo at the same time they're putting Batterskull into play off of their Stoneforge Mystic. So one other thing that comes up quite a bit is blocking their Germ token and sacrificing the Hex Mage without without them going over 20. Yeah, so it's a pretty important card in the matchup where, and given how like my experience is with how other people tend to play their wastelands, Urborg's not always long for this world against a lot of players. So yeah, and it can be also some of those secondary sources, we have to deal with port too. So even if you have Bayou Bayou. If they're porting one, we're never getting the Hex Mage down that way either. So going to 12 sources seems pretty risky.
Okay. Like I said, not gonna fight hard for.
Okay. Who are we giving ideas to?
I think that was with reference to how D&T should be wastelanding you.
So yeah. Yeah, one of the plus sides of ever doing something like this is you give out lots of free information to opponents.
Yeah.
So, Dredge.
But if everyone did that, the world would be a better place.
It's true. So, Dredge is in the burn category of one of the very, very, very best matchups. Mm-hmm. Any Bojuka Bog crop rotation deck is going to be in decent shape against Dredge, but this version also has a lot of graveyard hate, postboard, and Veil of Summers. So unless something jumps out to you right away, this one's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's specifically like I'm not sure if the fourth needle's better than one Not of This World, and that's it. Like I just
it's very rare to come. I've seen Chain of Vapor out of some of the mana Dredge lists. But it's like once in a blue moon. Like I don't think I've ever lost a game to Dredge or a match to Dredge in that manner. So I don't think the Not of This Worlds really do much of anything.
Yeah, and I'm sure this is also different than like manaless Dredge, where like you might want Needle for Phantasmagorian.
I almost feel bad sideboarding against manaless Dredge. Because
you have discard spells.
Yeah,
so you only win one of the games.
Yeah, well, that is one of the most lopsided matchups I've ever encountered in Legacy. Like playing anything. Yeah, with the 8 discard spells, it's 8 time walks, and then you have Leyline, Surgicals, Crop Bog, Needles for Phantasmagoria, and a fast combo, and even when they do have the answer to Leyline, that generally involves double mulliganing. To get it off the table, so virtually double, and then you get to have the awful game where you get to choose to be on the draw and time walk them that way too. It's just a lot of whenever I talk about Dredge, I assume mana Dredge.
Okay.
But yeah, they have their explosive draws where they can, on the play, Dredge 30 something cards off of the LED Faithless Looting lines or breakthrough into Faithless Looting lines. But other than that, it's basically when you want extra discard on the play versus when you want extra needles for Coliseum. That's basically it. Yeah,
this is sideboarding I'm cool with.
All right, so this one, just glancing at it, I don't know what I was thinking when I did it. This is definitely wrong. Eldrazi Stompy.
Well, is Eldrazi Stompy just like the normal colorless Eldrazi deck?
Yeah, just,
like the smaller one.
Yeah, just with the creatures, Wasteland, and Caracas kind of thing.
Yeah. Challenge.
Yeah, so we should definitely be boarding out a utility land. I don't know why I didn't do that when I initially made this. I don't think Bog does anything. Unless it's the white version, which I categorize differently anyway. Step generally doesn't do anything either. So
you can step a Dismember that's trying to gain a life.
Yeah, unless we have Urborg out, that's very rarely going to matter. They would have to have exactly a no Ancient Tomb draw. Go to 19 is how that would work out, or go to 1, take 19, because they would have to pay the double black for life, right?
Well, yeah, if they don't have an Ancient Tomb draw, Dismember gains a life.
Okay.
If you have Urborg. Yeah. Or if you don't have Urborg, because it's just pay 4 and then...
Yeah, I guess since we only want to cut one land anyway, the Bog is just... I mean, it's basically just the black source versus the one out of however many games. Step, Dismember, yeah. Yeah, I think Bog's probably fine to go, just on the off chance that's relevant. So I guess the question is, do we want another card here, or do we want to have an extra discard? So because Duress is really not great versus this deck. Like, it's decent. I think on the play maybe we want it because we can take Chalice.
I'm guessing Force doesn't do anything. Like we get to hit Chalice,
I guess they
but
could have. Well, let's actually see. I have the list. Let's see what a recent list of this looks like.
so they sometimes play Caracas, right? So we do need to leave and not of this world.
Yeah. So Wasteland and Caracas 2 each. Blast Zone's interesting. So I guess.
Wait, this list has like Displacer though.
Oh, this is the
Is
white
it?
one. This is the white
Yeah.
one. That got categorized as Stompy. Let's see if there's anything else here.
I'm calling my manager.
uh,
You're probably better off searching
all right, is this better?
Eldrazi Mimic.
I think
Yeah, this is better.
this is better. So yeah, I guess the Force of Vigor, since it looks like the white version had it too. So since it looks like they're going to be bringing in multiple copies of Spyglass, I think that's fair between the Chalice and the Spyglass, just to have an extra out.
This one doesn't have Caracas though. So does that mean we're allowed to cut not of this world?
I mean, I just played versus this deck last night and they had Caracas, so
Yeah, that's fine. So
I guess
as a default,
I think it's probably
so Needles to name Wasteland, so we still need that.
Yeah.
We need the discard. I'm not really sure what to cut then. Could it be like Petals?
Yeah, I don't think we want to cut the speed.
Yeah.
Here, because they don't have a ton of ways to stop our combo. It's really just the Wastelands and for versions that have Caracas, and even the other version that we saw, they split it, right? So the white Eldrazi version, it was kind of the same slots, except instead of 4 Wastelands, it was 2 Wastelands, 2 Caracas. So it looks like they're gonna have 4 utility lands. It's just how they choose to align 2 to 4 utility lands, however they choose to align them.
Can we cut the step for force?
Yeah, I guess we could go down both. That seems fine.
And then we still need one more for the second force.
No, not if you want to do bug too. So it's back to that argument as to whether it's acceptable to go to 22 lands.
Oh yeah, get him out of here.
I guess it's kind of like a little.
We're still keeping in all of our speed elements.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a little questionable going to down 2 lands against the Wasteland deck, but
like they're the kind of Wasteland deck that isn't looking to Wasteland you the same way Delver is.
Yeah, that's true.
Like they need their mana.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. That maybe they're not going to be aggroing us unless it's like on turn 3 or something. So I guess that
they would like have to thaw not you first to understand that they should do that, because normally I think they would just leave it up.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm willing to. If that comes up as be an issue, I can always revisit it. But I think that's fine. All right. So here's a matchup that changed recently. Elves now has an $80 card.
Which one?
That's actually reasonably impactful in the matchup. Allosaurus Shepherd.
I don't know what that is.
So basically, it's a 1/1 uncounterable elf that makes your other green cards uncounterable. That for 6 mana you can make all your guys 5/5s.
Dinosaurs. They become dinosaurs.
5/5s.
Dinosaurs.
They do
I see we both understand what's important about this card.
I understand that dying is what's important about that card, and you understand that flavor is what's important about that card. So
wait, so I don't know if I understand the problem with this card. Like, how is this different than Craterhoof besides the fact that it's an elf?
It's an additional card that comes down on the play under discard. It can come out with Green Sun Zenith. So basically it's just another card that comes out, and all they need to threaten to kill you is to have 4 guys in a cradle, essentially.
I understand. So it like allows them to have a density at like lower mana cost than they would have had to have otherwise.
Yeah, and just in a slot that was traditionally just another little creature, now they have essentially X, and which is 3 higher, and the Green Sun Zeniths are more devastating. So yeah, so they're just quicker. They're just a little bit quicker. So specifically how this impacts this board is normally I take 2 needles out, because really the only thing you could previously name going back 6 months to a year was Wirewood or Quirion. So,
but like some builds play Reclaimer,
so
or is
now
that
they
not
play
the case anymore?
the main. Newton's list is usually the person who's I go to for my first look at elves, and his list is now on a pile of Reclaimers too. So they now have basically 4 really good creatures that Needle impacts, but they do also have like tutorable answers to Needle too. So it's not like Needle's like this be all end all, but it definitely has more uses than it previously did.
Yeah, I remember from the Double Dash like Newton's list, and so I'm kind of just like picturing that and having like the option for a sideboard crop rotation too if you want.
So I think what he has, he was on like he still hadn't like, was he on Nettle Sentinels then too, or no?
I don't think so.
No. So I forget what
maybe.
slots I forget what slots
remember.
the Allosaurus went into, but he's definitely on both the Shepherd and Reclaimers.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Maybe it did have Nettle Sentinel. Whatever. Wait, no, I think it didn't, because I feel like I said the statement like he made room for the Reclaimers by getting rid of Nettle Sentinel or something.
Okay. Well, I would have to look.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. We're in the present now.
I'm saying that like we don't like literally have his list clipped right here.
Well.
Oh well, this isn't going to be his, but looks like the current lists are on.
There's 4 Nettles here, but this one doesn't have Reclaimer.
Interesting. Let's see if Newton's actually here anywhere.
I feel like it's a similar slot though.
There's the Reclaimers.
Hello, Newton.
This is pre-Shepherd though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the same or similar to the.
They're probably on some number of both, because I definitely played against. Look, sometimes you gotta have an answer, right?
You gotta be some kind of person to play Cabal Pit.
This list has enough black in it, right? It's got Therapy, Seize, Decay.
Well, I was more just surprised that you plan on getting a Threshold that easily.
You got Therapy to sacrifice your own elves.
You got Thoughtseize to target yourself.
I see. It's more. There's more avenues than you thought. But yeah, I've played against him like over the last week, and he definitely had Reclaimers and Allosaurus Shepherd. So I guess the question is it worth adjusting for Needles?
Probably. I think Allosaurus Shepherd like is minimally going to be over like maybe the second Behemoth or something like that. Praetor Hoof.
Okay, so what would the adjustment be then instead of that?
Are we allowed to cut Bog?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't believe that has text in this matchup.
Besides being a land.
Although we have seen Cabal Therapy, so we could Bog that before they get to flash it back. And that is never going to happen, but...
Is the one Safekeeper good?
So
I don't think I understand.
So the reason that I had that in there is one card that they've had for a while, or that he's had for a while, and I've seen it in other lists, is not just the Reclaimers, but they bring in Caracas out of the board. So it's just kind of like an additional Caracas answer in addition to the Needles, the Not of This Worlds, and Ghost Quarter. It's just an extra out that also happens to occasionally block things.
Can the Last Needle be better than the Safekeeper though? Like that also answers Caracas.
Yeah, it's just harder to get off the board for them, I think. Although they do have well.
But then you'll also die less, like sometimes. like
yeah,
I say it like that, but like you're also like a Thoughtseize deck that can be like, oh wow, I see you need exactly this to go well for you, so I can needle it now.
All right,
so the proactiveness combined with discard.
you want to get rid of these decays too, we could just erase the sideboarding entirely.
Hmm. The decays are weird.
They're kind
I,
of useful.
I get it though. I think there is like a consideration on the play having one less decay and having the bog, but like I'm not gonna fight hard for anything.
Yeah, I think one of the things we do want to do is kill an early reclaimer or, an early shepherd or something along those lines. The symbiote, if the draw guy comes through, that kind of stuff. I think there's enough reasonable targets for decay. I've also seen like random stuff like Pithing Needle out of elves, so yeah, it's usually a one of out of like random tribal decks that you already had your decays in. You're like, well, really glad I brought removal in for that particular thing. It just happens to work.
Yeah, I'm cool with this.
All right, so this is kind of
ENT.
So this is more or less the same. What did we end up doing with the other one? Except they have Swords to Plowshares. So I do not want to cut Step in this matchup.
Yep.
But yeah. All right.
Do we want the Force of Vigor over the library here?
I already closed it. Let's see what that list looks like. I guess it's basically the same thing, so
this one's still like scarier. They also have like Displacer.
Yeah.
And Thalia Heretic.
This really isn't that bad. You just need to plan a turn ahead. It's bad if you have like a heavy fetch land draw, but short of that, it's not that bad. Tomic.
and the Spyglass, which is like just so many of them playing 1/2 Spyglass really makes me want Force.
Yeah, what's the cut though? I guess is the question. Because they're on the similar. Well, they're on significantly more hate lands. They have the D&T hate land base. So we're not cutting Not of This Worlds or Needles or discard or decays.
I have a question. Sure. Is it ever like reasonable in any matchups to cut a Hex Mage?
I don't think I do, to be honest. I'm not opposed to the theory of it, but I guess the issue is like once you're in the Turbo Depths list, right, and you're committed to killing them as fast as humanly possible. I guess
it's more viable in like other depths lists where like you might be slowing down enough.
Yeah, I think most of the time it just has so much. Well, I don't know that it does anything here. Well, yes, it does. Potential. So even here, where it's not.
You can Hex Mage a Chalice.
Yes, so you take the counter off and go to 0, which.
Wow.
Yeah, so basically, this is a problem. So if they hit their one of Spyglass, that's a problem if we don't have Force of Vigors because we're down to just 2 decays. But as far as the Chalice itself goes, we start at 6 because we have the Hex Mages and the decays plus discard. So yeah, Chalice isn't usually that big of a problem unless you keep a 1-drop heavy hand with no Hex Mage.
Yeah, I did kind of forget about that, but I still do want answers to the Spyglass.
Yeah, so I guess the issue and the reason I didn't have it initially is like how many slots are you willing to dedicate for essentially 1 card? Because Chalice isn't that big of a deal, so we're really just boarding for this.
Like you don't really want to.
Relevant.
You don't really want to like Hex Mage the Chalice if you don't have to, though.
No,
but like you're also pitching a green card to do it, which like has some value.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now you're making me not want to bring as many forces in the other matchup.
Well, this was different. They had multiple copies of it, right?
Oh, and they have Caracas, yeah.
Yes. All right. So finish off the spaghetti category, this version is not that any of the other ones are all that bad, but Eldrazi Post is a pretty favorable matchup. They're really slow. We generally have time to kill them early. One of the most devastating things they can really do is, like, if they start glimmer posting to go over 20 to try and play into something big. But even then, most of their answers start at 7. So are usually...
Like, all is dust if they can survive, like, the Merit Lage turn.
Yeah, so this is kind of similar, except they'll probably have a couple more hate cards. So they'll probably have a couple of Spyglasses, too, and things like that. Maybe an Ensnaring Bridge. Cards like that. So here... the Sukenik approved max out on answers to artifacts is in place.
What's the Safekeeper for?
They usually have
a Caracas.
At least that, yeah. Plus, sometimes it'll randomly do enough of the chip damage to offset the Glimmer Post. So it's just...
Sorry.
Good. It's just better than some of the other cards. So, like, I think it's better than Not of This World just because it chips away. Not of This World's narrow.
Yeah, I was wondering if we're not allowed to play 3 Safekeepers and no Not of This World.
Yeah, I guess the only times you would really get smoked for that is if they get to one of their sweepers. So either Always Dust or Ugin. So the sweep version on that -1 kill your Lodge and Safekeeper. That's pretty solid. So I think that's probably why I didn't go in that direction, but I think it's relatively close. But Ballista, I guess, is probably the biggest issue. We don't want our answer to just get wiped off the board immediately.
What does Needle hit? Do they play like Manifest Key with Grim Monolith or something?
There's like a whole different... I mean, there's like...
Or Karn?
There's like 3 or 4 different variations of post lists. I don't think the list that tries to play its whole deck on turn 1 is really a post deck. That's more... Yeah, like they run both versions of the keys and monoloths of all kinds and the cards and stuff. That's a different deck than this is. There's also like a green post list with crop rotations and candelabra, so that's different than this too. That's actually later in the list. We have that list on here.
I might actually have to break this up into 2 sections at this rate.
So yeah, there's yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not like opposed to what we're doing in a general sense. I just like fret over like the ones that we're shaving maybe should be other ones. Like I could see cutting a Sylvan Scrying because we're not like being attacked in the hand front that much. So then having more protective elements like either the Needle, Not of This World, like
yeah, they do have Thought Knot Seers, so they do have 4 virtual discard spells.
Yeah, I guess so.
It comes up. They play it on turn 2 a decent amount.
Yeah, but like they don't have like counters backing up like we've seen in other cases too, or like I don't know.
You say that, and then they play the 1 in a colorless card that counters a sorcery.
Warping Whale.
There you go.
That's why we got bored out of the Sylvan Scrying, so that can't happen to you.
What would you want to keep over the Sylvan Scrying?
I'm not sure.
All right, well, you can let that percolate, and if it hits you, we'll come back and make a swap.
I don't know. Maybe the pedal? I don't know. I feel like we do still kind of want to be fast-ish.
Alright, I can see it.
Kind of slow.
Alright, I can see it.
Well, scientific method here. We're very calculating whatever. Just like, yeah, that one's fine.
Well, we're still in the letter E, and we're 2 hours in. So
Like I said, it might be split up over two. I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into.
Neither did I. So, Enchantress.
Yeah,
This is pretty.
fifth most popular deck.
It's pretty straightforward. All removal and a card against a deck that's not going to damage us really quickly, in exchange for stuff that's not very good.
I have nothing to contest on this one.
All right. Well, here now we get to actually do something interesting.
Yeah.
A deck from scratch. So.
Okay. So Espervile is kind of like if Death and Taxes and the fair part of Alluring had a baby.
Yeah, this matchup's miserable. I played this on Sunday. It was really close, but
they get to
just
play
have so
Baron
much.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, they just have so much. It's not even that those cards are the problem. The real problem is, let's see, where's it at?
Venser.
No. This is the real problem. That they have a virtual 5 copies of that with 4 recruiters, and there are legitimately 0 main deck ways to get it off the board. So it's an auto loss.
We need the Cabal Pit.
It's an auto loss if this hits the table in game 1, on top of everything else that they're already doing.
You can try to like wasteland them off of white.
Yeah, we run.
Oh no, you play Ghost Quarter. Oh no.
Yeah, they have this. So unless they have exactly snow-covered plains as their only white source, and that's about the only way that's gonna work.
Okay, so but luckily post board we have Abrupt Decay.
We have 2 copies of Abrupt Decay, so it's still pretty solid. And everything else they have, all the flyers are really annoying.
Wait, what does Active Authority do? I forget.
That's basically just like an artifact enchantment removal card that's like repeated, right?
Can you hover over?
Yeah, so it's basically coming to play.
Oh, it's from
Exile.
the Not Real set. Okay.
Not real set. Have you played True Name?
Yeah, that should not have been printed either.
Don't worry, they don't need it. They don't need it to be a not standard legal set to print nonsense.
Jeez.
So yeah, this is not relevant for the matchup.
like True Name is fine for multiplayer, but True Name just wasn't designed to be heads up.
Yeah. So this deck has Caracas, has 3 wastelands between the main and side, has 4 swords between the main and side, brings in Gilded Drakes to go
It does
with...
eliminate Exile?
No, it does not, thankfully.
Okay.
So bring in Gilded Drakes to go with their main deck answers of Palace Jailer, Venser, Flickerwisp, Baron, Meddling Mage cuts off our outs, Charming Prince goes over 20, Baleful Strix blocks.
Weathered Wayfarer.
Yeah, it's an all right. Yeah, well, on the draw when they play this,
yeah,
that's kind of cringe when they can start chaining wastelands, or just go grab the Caracas at the end of the line. Yeah. So this is a really rough matchup, and
all right.
Yeah, so let's. Where's that at? Oops. All right, so let's get the master's take.
So 5th is the case in here.
Yeah.
It seems like we might need the safekeepers too. Like they have enough ways to target our thingies.
Yeah, I agree. So I just boarded for this on Sunday's event. I'm curious to see how close you're going to get to what I did.
I think that might actually be it. I feel like Veil might be too narrow.
Yeah, so you make the argument for similar to before for digging to your narrow answers. You could sort of make an argument for library, but I don't think it's a great one. You can make an argument for Oof shutting off their vials since it's so important to their deck and so many of their tricks involve it, but I don't think that's particularly great either.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So, yeah, these 5, I want to cut the Bog. That's the easy one. Since they're like not a Thalia deck and stuff, right?
They're not a Thalia. Well, I just closed it. No, I don't think they're a Thalia deck.
Yeah, I feel like we're gonna end up cutting like a Petal and Spirit Guide or something like that.
That is usually where it has to start in matchups like this. You just don't have the...
You need like a density.
Yeah, there's no Thalia.
And they have Strix to block.
They have a lot of flyers. Strix, Flicker Wisp, Drake's post board. You haven't lived until you're not of this world a Drake trigger and it comes in and can still block.
Wait, doesn't Gilded Drake say that the trigger can't be countered?
I don't think so. No, it's just if the exchange doesn't happen, then the other trigger happens. But if you actually straight up count, if you actually straight up counter the trigger, it comes into play. Unless Moto is bugged, because that's how it worked.
Oh no, I just remember weird things. No, you're right. You're right. Wait, it looks like the Gilded Drake would be sacrificed if you're not of this world. Oh wait, oh no, you're just countering the whole ability. Yep. The errata's like really weird and long.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like the whole chunk, so it's fine. Okay, yeah, I get it. Alright, Depths Expert, Watchwolf92 here. Never played with Dark Depths in my life. Looks like we can cut Duress. What are we needling in this matchup? Oh, Wasteland and Caracas? Okay, yeah, I'm gonna go with Duress. What do you say?
Yeah, so basically what I did was one Bog, 2 Petals, a Spirit Guide, and a Duress in the event. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that was
expert.
I'm not sure if that's correct, but that's what I ended up doing.
Yeah, these cards are definitely right. You said you only cut 1 Duress though?
Yeah. I mean, the issue is that post board they're going up to... Well, they have counters to be... So they have Force of Wills. I don't know what their boarding strategy is. Maybe I'll have to go check out... Actually, my opponent on Sunday actually did stream it, so I can go back and see what his boarding plan was as far as counters. No, I definitely saw multiple Force of Wills post board. So they have counters. They have 4 Swords to Plowshares. You know, especially on the play, they have Vials. So there's a lot of really good targets. So I don't know that I want to go too far down. And plus the information is so important. Like knowing, you know, what you need to beat specifically.
Well, the only other card I would consider is like we can cut a Sylvan Scrying to leave in this Duress.
Yeah, I think the other issue is this is similar to some of the other matchups where we're often going to need extra tutors for first quarter in certain spots.
Yeah, I agree.
Or even more importantly, we're going to need tutors for step because they're almost always going to have, even if we can see their hand and know they don't have a trick, they're going to have spots where they can have 1 or 2 blockers, often of different colors. I ran into, in one really close game, they had Strix and Flicker Wisp. So it was like, you know, you're looking at 3 turns if you don't have another way to tutor for an answer. So. Oh
wait, I was wondering something. Can you play Vesuva to copy Dark Depths and then keep that one? Oh wait, no. Vesuva comes in with the counter. So
the one thing you could Vesuva is doubling up on your other utility lands. So if you wanted to have double block, double step, that kind of stuff. That's so...
like I was thinking of double step. Then I was like, wait, does Vesuva work? And obviously it doesn't.
It's not. One time at a Grand Prix, a world champion asked me if I play a second Dark Depths if I got a 2020.
Wow.
and
It's
actually
okay.
called a judge about it. It was quite fun.
Yeah, you'd be surprised, or maybe not with that story, like how often like the the higher level players will call judges on things that the grinders would know from having like interacted with it so much, or just like reading of like everyone learns in different ways. So certain pros like learn through pattern recognition instead of necessarily like extrapolating why something works in particular. So I'd probably say once every other pro tour, I'm explaining to like one of the top 100 players in the world like how a very normal interaction works, and
Yeah.
then we like have to call a judge, and then
I mean, the process for them obviously worked. They got to
well,
where
yeah,
they are with that.
well,
So
I think in like a non-offensive way, I think at the end of the day, there's like very few like actually talented people, like just naturally gifted. Like John Finkel's like one that comes to mind. Um, I think there's very few of those, and a lot more people are either the product of lots of practice or the product of their environment, but not it, like I don't think many people are just them. Like, uh, yeah.
fair enough. So another matchup that has changed recently is Goblins. Are you familiar with Muxus?
Yeah, I think I like blew that out of my nose earlier today. Um, Muxus is like the ringleader that puts him into play in Lords. It's like for six. It's like a 6 mana 5/5 Lord. Put them into play, and
You're close. It's a 4/4, but yes, it ringleaders for 6, and they go into play instead of your hand, and then it
it's a
gets
Lord, right?
yeah. Well, it gets plus for each goblin, so it swings
It
from
gets
massive.
bigger.
It gets bigger, yeah,
Oh, so it's like Rival Master,
sort of, yeah.
except it's plus X plus X.
Yeah, it's going to win the game the vast majority of the time that it's play, which it can on turn 2 off Lackey. So this is a
Where's
match.
your Sylvan Safekeeper versus the block? Where's your burn
I
argument?
was just going to say, to see this little thing here, it says last edited January. Muxus was not a card in January. I was playing.
Actually, if you look at the top right, it says last edit was 4 minutes ago.
Yes, that's correct. Anything under before the letter G has been updated since January. You are correct. I stand corrected. But yes, I have been boarding in safekeepers in this matchup. So basically, what I've been doing is not bothering with the Force of Vigor.
Yep,
From
I agree.
most recent goblins lists that I've seen have had basically very few cards that would even interact with. Like, I'm not really going after the vial, and they generally have like maybe a pithing needle in the sideboard, but usually not even that.
Yeah, just take your lumps these days.
Yeah, pretty much. So what I've been doing is adding 2 safekeepers and taking out a not as world, because they sort of have a similar functionality. So we're kind of already adding an additional Caracas protection point.
Yeah, I wonder if we can't just play 3 safekeepers and get the second out of this world.
Yeah, I guess it's a possibility. The only downside is that the safekeepers are vulnerable to them just sinkholing you repeatedly, because they do have some removal. They have the cycler that does damage equal to the goblins, and then they have the 2-drop, the black red creature that comes in and pings goblins. So they have about 3 or 4 cards that can. And recently, I've been starting to see an uptick in Sting Scourger again. So usually
Jelly Goblin.
Yeah, usually out of the sideboard, but it's been showing up here and there. So safekeepers are a little softer in those spots specifically, whereas not in this world. Oftentimes they'll, like, especially if you're on the play, oftentimes they'll tap out for Lackey or Vial, and you just have a turn 2 combo, and you can just legit main phase it because they can't do anything against not of this world. But if you have safekeeper, you have to give them another turn, which kind of gives them another look at Wasteland, gives them another look at, just problematic cards.
Could it be possible that you would want the 3rd safekeeper on the draw to try to mitigate like the Lackey games, and then you have like the extra card to give?
Yeah, they got like that. So just 2 on the play, 3 on the draw.
I think I'm gonna have to call it at 11 our time, and then we'll have to continue later.
If you're tired now, we can just pick it back up later. It's up to you.
No,
All right.
11. I'm just letting you know in advance. That way, it doesn't seem like I came up with it out of nowhere.
All right, that seems good. I'm fine with skipping Grixis Control if you are, because that's not really a deck right now either. Yep.
Yeah, it's really just Snoko until Astrolabe is banned for like that whole category of like Bug and Grixis and what.
Yep. I'll leave stuff here because you just, people that are playing leagues or local events or whatever, run into something random. It's there for a reference point, but yeah, we don't need to go through it. I don't think anyone in their right mind would ever run this. So what do you think?
I mean, once again, Dreadhorde Arcanist is just not the same type of card to me. So
fair enough. So this is basically a carbon cutout of the other sideboarding plan. So any particular thoughts since that's your baby?
So where Grixis does things differently than Bug is that here it has Dreadhorde Arcanist and Young Pyromancer. You don't have access to Abrupt Decay, and you don't have access to him to Torok. Which seems kind of weird, like you're still playing black, so you would think that you have access to him, but it's more that your tools end up being more red-based. There are times where you need to double bolt, so like the ability to get double red can matter more frequently. Once again, you can try to concern yourself with certain things that happen in the sideboard, like Submerge, the Edict effects, whatnot, but at the end of the day, it's what's going to be happening in the matchup is Wasteland, Thoughtseize, a more consistent clock. Like, you're probably more afraid to see Dreadhorde Arcanist than you would be to see a Tarmogoyf on turn 2, for instance. So the fact that the threat base is very different makes you want to approach things differently. I feel like we would still want the second Veil of Summer in this matchup.
Okay.
Just, similar, like fighting over discard encounters.
So yeah, I guess we're going back to
and also Brazen Borrower, so just having a lot of it.
Well, it's kind of just swapping out because that's where we're gonna end up, right, with the Not of This World again.
Yep.
So just a more versatile, like just accept the cost that we're eventually going to hit spots where days might be relevant at the benefit of fighting the discard in earlier spots.
Right. And like something that, something that like wasn't brought up before. Sorry, there's like sounds that happen, like firecrackers and stuff.
Yeah, you're not that far from me. I'm assuming you've been dealing with this since like early May.
Yeah. So sometimes there's like, I forget exactly where you're located, but that sound I believe is coming from Manayunk.
Okay.
But you hear the same thing?
I can hear it through the stream, but no, we have fireworks basically every night. My partner, she used to live up in Conshohocken. We used to be in the Manayunk area a lot too, and it's constant. Yeah. It's constant there. I'm just outside Philly in the suburbs, and the northeast Philly and the suburbs are just constant too. It's
The only thing I know about Conshohocken, or however you pronounce it, is that's where I went for all my IKEA furniture. I went there like 7 weeks in a row when I first moved in.
Yeah, that IKEA is kind of like, it looks like you're going through like an industrial area. It doesn't really, you wouldn't think you're about to stumble onto an IKEA and then, oh, there it is.
Yeah, IKEA is like the 8th wonder of the world, so I'll go there as much as I could. So yeah, I'm okay with this Grixis Delver sideboarding.
All right. Hogak's not really all that different than any of the other graveyard decks. It's identical except decays are actually relevant versus it, because one of the few ways they can actually steal a game in the matchup is just by randomly killing you with the altar draws. So
yeah, you can also like hit a crab that, like, if you Thoughtseize them and you see like that is their plan, maybe you're willing to spend like one of your petals to Abrupt Decay the crab or something.
Yep. But yeah, it's a pretty straightforward matchup. They have no flyers, post board, their answers are really kind of just unfortunate for them in the matchup anyway. I'm sure they're for a lot of other things, but what they have is Assassin's Trophies, which we can kind of just sit and double port them endlessly.
And you have Veil.
And okay. Veil and discard. And yeah, it's just a really bad spot for them. So I don't think there's too much to dig into there unless something jumps out to you.
Is Decay better than playing the Last Needle to be able to target altar?
Yeah, I think for the functionality, one needle is just a turn faster, slash less mana intensive, so you don't actually need the green. You can have your natural Urborg stage depth draws where you set up the turn 3 combo, but also answer their altar without having to worry about stalling yourself out a turn to answer.
Yeah.
But also on the decay side of things, like you kind of got at earlier, like it's a little bit more versatile. So like the needle is just coming down and naming the altar every single time. The decay can answer the altar, but it can also hit the crab. It can also just, sometimes they can get a clock going. Sometimes it can just stall that out ever so slightly enough to matter. I think it's pretty close. I wouldn't argue either way.
I feel like does the second duress do anything? I guess it's like for trophy, but
yeah, it's for trophy. It also just they can't turn one the altar ever, right? So it also hits that. Plus their random card draw spells, so it hits careful study and cards like that as well.
Yep. Well, like I think it could be possible that the duress is better than one of the decays.
Yeah, it's possible. I'm generally a scared human being, so I'm a little scared of the altar off the top, and Abrupt Decay makes me feel very safe.
Yeah, it just like some combination of all the stuff seems weird to me in that like I feel like cutting needle for decay is a downgrade, and then like the needle versus or the decay versus duress is like a side grade. Like it depends on like what situations you're hedging for, but for some reason, like given our main deck configuration, like what we have access to, it feels like bringing both decays feels kind of weird.
Okay.
Like I feel like in my opening hand, I like really just absolutely never want to see like 2 decays. But I guess you could like apply some of that logic to needle. But like needling fetch lands is also not nothing in the matchup too.
Yeah.
I'm all about needling the fetch.
Back into the Urborg versus a black deck conversation.
Well, no, it's because of crab.
Oh yeah, I guess that is relevant. All right, now you're gonna make me look. Now we're gonna pull up a Hogak list.
The Gak that smiles back.
Let's see what the fetch. So they're on. Oh wow,
well, they play Dried Arbor, so they actually have to play 4. Like.
Fair enough. So this is actually kind of relevant then, because you can hit a 4 of.
Like both the greens have to be 4 ofs, so like Misty and Burden.
Yeah. So, have you considered that duress hits bridge from below though?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, duress is actually like when you look at it. I mean, there really isn't a ton to hit, right? So it's just the altars and
careful study.
Yeah, you're really not.
And
you're hitting half of a therapy, but then yes, trophy post board. So, but it's still a pretty minimal amount of cards, and we're gonna have at least 7 discard spells even with the currents. So it's the 8th discard spell that we're talking about.
Yeah, like looking at it again, it makes me feel like needle on like altar, fetch land, carrion feeder. Like I think there's enough like things happen in there.
Or that's just better than the decay, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. That is what I'm saying.
I can live with that. So we're about 10 minutes out from 11. So do you just want to Pause.
Um, did you have any stories or things you wanted to discuss? Like, or we can also like address the chat. Like, I'm pretty open with, you know, anything anyone wants to know about me or getting better at Magic and my thoughts or history or the same things for Tom too. I'm sure he's
Yeah.
open enough,
Yeah.
especially about his music choices and stuff.
What's wrong with my music choices?
There's nothing wrong. It's just I can't identify the artists of the songs.
That's a good thing,
We,
though, right?
we actually had a fun game the last time we did a stream together where uh, where your partner was like listening to music and it was just loud enough for me to be able to like hear parts of it. And I was trying to guess the songs.
Yeah, she's upstairs right now, but yeah, she has good taste in music. She probably has better taste in music than me.
So chat, do you have any questions for me, Watchwolf92, Jonathan Sukenik, or for Tom? You know, Tom doesn't stream the most, so
I'm assuming that anybody that's still here is
a
probably
bot.
half asleep. Almost 3 hours of sideboard discussion is not the most riveting viewership, I would assume.
Well, you know, some of them are just chilling after the raid from Onrog, and then other ones are just, you know, enjoying. Why never the pull to slow depths? Well, you like prefer like bug depths, right? And that's like a
Yeah,
slower depths, right? But like slow depths
sort
means
of.
like Dark Confidant, right?
So, I mean, the main similarities between bug and slow, because they were basically um, more or less the structure, the setup of it with like the 28 ish, like 27, 26 to 29 lands, somewhere in that range with the 4 Mox Diamonds. They're kind of like built the same way in that regard. But the divergence is what they're built to beat. So I have just a natural desire to not lose to combo decks. And the majority of my play is online, where I think combo decks are a lot more represented than they are in paper or were in paper. Um, and in particular, if you're doing league play, just the amount of time it takes to finish a match with combo, even if you have the same share of people playing combo and fair decks, the combo players' matches are just going to end faster and they're going to end up in the queues faster. So you're going to disproportionately get paired against them. So I think my lists are often built for where I play the most, and Bug was built to beat combo. And similar to like some of the stuff we were talking about earlier with Ant and some of the other combo decks, where I don't think like Turbo Depths is in such a great place, or at least slight underdog. I feel heavily favored with Bug versus Ant, and other decks of that variety. I think my win rate's like close to 80% versus Ant with Bug.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you guys talked about that on Honorog stream a little bit, and I think Jarvis and I don't remember what Edgar said, but Jarvis was definitely said the Ant deck was favored, and that's not been my experience. It's not like a pilot skill thing. Like for over a year I was tracking it, and so I have like my match records against like players that I know are like outstanding with Ant, and it's still extremely positive. So my deck's built to handle that kind of stuff, whereas Slow Depths is built to handle fair decks and metas. So like Slow Depths has such a good plan B, or a much better plan B than Bug does, to the point where they're getting a lot of edge in the fair matchups, which are definitely more represented. Like if you're going to go to a Star City Games event back when they were doing Legacy Opens and things like that, or even like any big paper event, essentially Grand Prix, you're just going to see more fair decks than what you see online. So I think they were just built for two different spots, and that's never really been. I'm not the type of person that just wants to draw some extra cards with Bob and bring Goyfs in out of the sideboard, or some Planeswalkers to, that's, I don't know. It's not my style of deck, I guess.
Yeah. The comment about like as a non-depths player, I could see like Jarvis may like the outsider looking in, just kind of classifying a lot of like depths deck like a lot more similarly. And you know, for instance, you said here that like Turbo Depths doesn't have like a good ant matchup, so it could be hard for us to be able to understand like the subtle differences. But it makes a lot of sense the way you kind of phrase it from there.
Yeah, I think that just the disruption is just overloaded, right? So when you're playing against like slow black green from Storm, like their plan is going to be discard into draw engine into more discard. So they're hoping to play a Thoughtseize or a Duress or an Inquisitor or whatever their discard package is into a Dark Confidant into just either the combo or more disruption. And that's Ant is very capable of beating you off the top of the deck. It doesn't take much for them to play out mana for 2 or 3 turns. And then Brainstorm Hide or Ponder Hide or just one of them into Ad Nauseam and then just kill you. It's like it's kind of, you can't fight the top of their deck at all, and their deck is designed to win through things like that. Whereas I have all the same discard and the Brainstorm to make sure I have even a similar amount. Like I'm not going to be drawing, if Bob lives for 4 turns, obviously they're going to be further ahead than the Brainstorm would be, but for the first 3 turns of the game, I'm seeing more discard on average than they are. And
there's also some amount of like explosiveness that comes with the Brainstorm too, like being able to variance into just like producing a 2020 when they just played discard spell the previous turn.
Yep, and then obviously things like hiding Flusterstorms, hiding Surgical, hiding crop rotations. So, so the discard and cutting off the graveyard aspects are kind of similar, but Bug has 3 Surgicals too, and then the Brainstorms protect them, the Flusterstorms. So once you start looking at 8 discard spells, 3 counters, 3 Surgicals, 4 more crops for graveyard hate, you're into the high teens in disruption pieces and Brainstorms to find them and protect them. And that's just, plus the ability to just threaten the combo relatively early too. Like that's a lot for a spell-based critical mass kind of deck to really get around, because they can't do the traditional build up their board with mana with either LEDs, petals, and lands, and then just get to the one spell, because if that's the way they do it and the one spell gets Flusterstormed or the spells they're hiding get Surgical, they're kind of just dead in the water.
Mm-hmm. So to address Rude Eternal's comment about the 2 ley lines, we did discuss a little bit earlier, but to kind of be able to summarize it very succinctly. So you see that there's 2 ley line and 2 surgical, so the natural thought is like, why don't you just play 4 ley line? So part of it is that by having so many ley lines, you can be your opponent can take advantage of that knowledge and be boarding in cards like Wear Tear, Reverent Silence, things that if they knew you only played say 1 or 2 ley lines, then they likely wouldn't bring them in. So they actually become more potent by being able to split them up. The other factor is that you want Surgical against decks that say play Source of Plowshares like Snoko. So then you're able to gain this flexibility while also making the ley lines you do choose to play better. And it's not really something you're explicitly trying to mulligan to. It's just the graveyard hate spell that is in your hand. Like, you're probably keeping similar hands in the matchup that would have a Surgical or a ley line.
There's also the tilt factor, that if a black-red player keeps the hand with Reverent Silence and Perfects, so with like Ritual, Entomb, Exhume, Reverent Silence, Fetch Bayou, and they hit your ley line and then use Surgical Gristlebrand, they may never play the deck again, so you have that.
Well, so the reason why ley line and not Crypt or Gravedigger's Cage is because, so when you build a sideboard, you can kind of have different headings for cards you would want. Like, I want 3 cards that do this general effect and whatnot. And then before you know it, if you just had a card that did each of those effects, you would have like a 20-card sideboard. So you have to make like concessions like somewhere. So what I believe the logic is here is that the first and second ley line are just the dedicated graveyard like hate spells, and those were non-negotiable. And then we kind of just proceeded from there to see, okay, can we reasonably play the 3rd ley line? No, I think we gain enough equity across the board in the metagame by choosing to play Surgical Extraction. So it's like we wouldn't want to play a less powerful card like Crypt or Grafdigger's Cage to be allowed to play. Like, the Leyline is just so high impact in the matchups that we want specifically Leyline for.
Yeah, and basically the biggest thing with Black Red specifically is the majority of the games they're going to win against us because we're at our heart. We have a lot of ways to crack the Chancellor locks between eight Spirit Guides and Petals combined. One of the fastest ways we're going to lose is just losing before we get to play our graveyard interaction. So we already have Crop Bog for like turn 1 on. So where we're going to lose is when they're on the play and we can't interact. So Leyline specifically is a card that kind of covers up part of those holes, and Surgical kind of helps cover up part of those holes, whereas something like Cage and Crypt, they kind of fall in with the rest of our, like if we're getting a turn and they don't already have a Gristlebrand or something devastating in play, we're probably going to win anyway. So I don't think they really contribute to the holes in the matchup.
Thanks for the raid, Goblin Lackey.
Oh, sweet. I saw a Stifle comment. It went by though.
I mean, Stifle's like your thing, right? Like, did anyone actually put in like Stifle in their Death deck before you did?
I don't think so. It's kind of like a leap, right? So when I built Bug initially, I kept getting into these spots where Needle specifically required guesswork, right? And some of our harder matchups. So you get into the spot versus DNT where you have to give them a turn because you can't get like main phase, like say they don't have a wild, you can't get main phase Flicker Wisp, and you don't know whether Caracas or Wasteland's coming. It could really be either, or they could draw either. And basically Stifle allows you to wait and not have to deal with it against any lands based variant, like specifically lands itself, because they have Wasteland, Ghost Quarter, Caracas, Maze of Ith. They basically just have this laundry list of cards that interact with you. So whenever they have crop rotation, you just can't do anything. Like your Needle doesn't do anything, because if you go for the combo, they'll just get whatever your Needle didn't hit and wreck you with it. So Stifle sits back, and it doesn't matter. If they don't have an onboard way to beat you, crop rotation doesn't beat you. You can stifle their Caracas, they can stifle their Wasteland. It just doesn't matter. And then in the matchups where Needle is really, really soft, Stifle still does work. Like in certain combo matchups, Needle, well, some of them it's a little bit better now, like TES has Wishclaw Talismans, but against like Ant and decks where you really don't want Needle, Stifle can, I know Stifle doesn't beat Storm per se, generally, because oftentimes like their Pest and Flames lines and things are going to end up with a discard spell before they actually play Tendrils. But one of the big ways you can get edge in that matchup is just time walking them by hitting a fetch land or cutting them off of a little mana that way. And if they happen to have
stopping the Brainstorm Shuffle.
Yep. And if they happen to get a little reckless with the Tendrils, it can blow them out every now and then, or if they're just forced into a specific line with it. So basically it's just basically the way I view it in Bug is it's pithing Needle, but it's just way better.
Yeah, that's kind of like the bad card in a established archetype thing that like I would do / like appreciate. It's like Pithing Needle has the advantage of you can play it before you play things. So like you can play it on Wasteland before you play like an important piece, for instance. But at the end of the day, the real like advantage to Needle is that it doesn't clog up mana on the turn that you need to start doing things. Stifle loses that like mana use, like requires the extra mana, but then at the cost of a single mana, you gain this huge optionality of just like information or time or flex. Like I can phrase it so many different ways, but it's not something that's like tangible, which is why it's like very intuitive that a lot of people would question like, why Stifle, why one, why not more, or whatever. But like, frankly, if you have multiple Stifles in your hand, then there is a point at which you would rather have had like the Needle effect, because you might just be overloading on the same thing, or it's just not mana efficient to leave up 2 blue in your 3-color deck that's playing Hex Mage. Like, by having 1, the times you draw it, you allow yourself the optionality of being able to play significantly different. But the times that you don't have it, then we're not even having this discussion. So it's like in Limited, you can also play very situational cards that yield a certain like blowout potential or allow you to like there have been times where I have boarded in any kind of fog effect in a format that is aggressively oriented because of the uniqueness of what it allows you to do when it's in your hand. And when it's not in your hand, once again, it just like doesn't matter. But when it is in your hand, you're gonna make all these like weird attacks. Like I'm gonna attack my 3/3 into your 4/4. This bluffs a trick, but you're not gonna block because you're already ahead in the race. But then you're not gonna be able to play around this fog, and that's a lot less common. So by playing Stifle in your bug depths, you're kind of doing something similar.
Exactly. So the one Stifle gets the Sukenik seal of approval.
Yeah, that's exactly the type of thing I would want to do if I were to play depths. It's a bad card, and like usually the bad cards I try to play are really just because I've envisioned this like flexibility that isn't like tangible.
Fair enough. So that thing's really small on my screen. Is that black, green, or bug as far as the mid range bug? Is that what that says?
So yeah, so I think what chat's trying to ask is like how you compare them, or
Well, there's a second. Bob Huang a few months ago built a bug version that's kind of like a cross between slow depths, like black green slow depths, and almost like lands. So it has Okos, it has Euro, and then it has the depths stuff. Not hex mage.
I think that's also just trying to accomplish a different thing though. Like that one almost sounds closer to me like the green and white decks we were talking about, but maybe that's wrong, like in terms of analysis.
Yeah, I think if I had a choice of the two, I would run the bug version, just because those cards are so much stronger. So I think Euro is an insane Magic card. I think Oko is an insane Magic card. So if you're going to try to, and I think that's one of the biggest issues with slow black green right now, is that you're trying to outvalue people at times or grind people out at times when there's just better cards to do that in the format.
Too many good cards.
Yeah. So if you're going to go down that path and you just want to have the depths combo or pieces of the depths combo, at least with the lands, and you want your backup plan to be to outgrind them, Oko and Euro seems like a better way to go. So if I was choosing between the two, that's the one I would play.
Yeah, but it's not to be confused with like Tom Het bug decks. Like these are different decks.
Yeah, we're not mid-ranging people with anything I build.
All right. And so, any other questions, chat, before we finish up for tonight? We'll give a few minutes.
I think we actually got further than it looks. I think there's more. Yeah, I mean, there's more between. Yeah, there's way more lists between A and H than there are the rest of the way.
Yeah, so we're kind of like halfway through, so I think we could just schedule this for another time next week.
Sounds good to me. Next one's gonna have a lot more lists to do from scratch. Some of these you're just gonna laugh at because you're gonna say mono blue Delver is basically the 8th Delver spot, but Echo Karn's a real deck. The Titan deck's a real deck. Snowco, Shark Still. I don't know if you've seen Shark Still. Those are actually played legacy decks.
Yeah. I'm not like familiar with the literal list, but if you just gave me that name, I can probably come up with.
Yeah. So we only got to one list that wasn't already on here with Esper Vial. Looks like here, like even if you want to take the nonsense out and say, or the fringe stuff out and say like Mono Blue Delver and Merfolk aren't real lists, we still have about 4 or 5 lists to do from scratch, which I think is more fun than just updating.
Yeah. It's fine. I'm actually kind of, part of me is and part of me isn't, but like I'm like kind of surprised how much I was able to like help with some of the numbers or plans that we had. So that was definitely flattering.
Yeah, I mean, it's always like helpful when you're just doing something like by yourself and you're just, you just have conflicting thoughts. getting a second opinion on it that you respect, you highly respect. It's just very useful to either confirm where I am or just help me realize that I'm being an idiot or missing something kind of obvious.
Well, one thing that also helps is like if you talk to another depths expert, it could be possible that they might have like learned depths from you to like an extent or something like that. So then the feedback might be slightly more echo chamber like oriented, whereas I'm coming from like a fundamentals of magic approach, and like I know I'm not the depths expert. I know that that's you, but like there are still just like magic concepts that can help like convey and talk about.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly where we want to be for this, right? We don't want this to be like like something that's set in stone. This wants to just be like a fundamental starting point, right? So
yeah,
like
like
here's a good place to start. If you look at this and for whatever reason, whether that's what you see out of the opponent's deck, your local meta, the styles of these versions of decks that you see, or just your own personal play style where something will work better for you,
yeah,
by all
like
means.
just like many things in Magic, including the sideboard guide, a lot of it's are just like rules of thumb, which means that when we're writing down these numbers, there's a lot of assumptions that are being made, and all the time in Magic and with other activities you may do, it's important to like question the assumptions or question like how we even arrive to the numbers or the cards that are being cut. Like I brought up that one time about how come we're not cutting more petals versus Elvish Spirit Guides and stuff like that. Like at the end of the day, nothing is really sacred, but on the other side, you need to make some sort of assumptions, or else you can't get anywhere. Like there's way too many things to consider. We're not computers that are able to just plug through all the numbers and be like, all right, we should exactly play like 3 Inquisition of Kozilek and 1 Duress or something like that. Like we just can't reasonably do that. At some point you should just make assumptions. So it's weird that I'm kind of saying like have rational assumptions and question your assumptions, but it's also about questioning it in the right places or at the right times. So for instance, if you're in a match of Magic, that is not the time to be like, oh, I think I might want to get the 3rd Abrupt Decay in the sideboard. Like that is not an appropriate time to be thinking that thought. That's post tournament thoughts, pre-tournament thoughts. Like once you're signed up with a list, that is the sword you're wielding. It doesn't matter if you chose the wrong blade. You need to use that like however you possibly can. So similarly, you have to be very nimble in the process of sideboarding. So you should, like, no one's going to a sword fight never having wielded the sword before, but it's true that like you're judging by your opponent or even how you're feeling that day. Like maybe you threw up that morning, so you can't do your signature sword strike thing. Like there's going to be all these factors that happen from individual to individual, opponent to opponent, that interaction. So it's important to be flexible in that regard and just be aware of the situation. So like, for instance, and you might even encounter certain like situations, like take one of the Eldrazi matchups where we don't bring in as much Force of Vigor, and there might be times where you end up hex maging a chalice more often than you think you might have otherwise, or that we have considered. Then maybe that leads to you also leaving in like more spirit guides and cutting Lotus Petal because there's going to be more chalices on 0 than you originally expected. Like there are assumptions that we have to make to write these numbers, and those are the questions you should, or those are the assumptions you should be questioning.
Definitely. You touched on it like really quickly there. That was another question that we had on the Esper Vial. I don't know if you want to get to that quickly or just wrap it up or whatever.
Well, what's up?
Basically, the question was, is it worth trying to make a space for a 3rd Decay specifically for that matchup, just because of how much of
not for this guide.
Specifically for how much of a headache Peacekeeper is, I think was the general gist. So, yeah, I think we could touch on like whether different cards could be in there
Yeah, like
later.
yeah, like for the sake of this guide, we're definitely making the assumption that the 75 is what you're playing. Like
Yeah.
if you already chose the sword and you're wielding it, like how do you slice properly? But like as a part of a completely separate conversation of like changing the deck, I could see maybe playing a card like Plague Engineer, like a card that you could play on turn two to be able to address Peacekeeper, Goblins, Elves as a one of.
It's possible, yeah.
Not saying it's great, but just like some of the changes of just like how lackey and like goblins is being perceived, or like what you've explained to me, and then like the fact that elves is allowed to be faster now, like it seems like that
Yeah, I
might
think
be a
I think
good.
I think the overwhelming, that's not the right word. I think the main reason why I don't go down that path was
It's
specific.
just 3 mana.
Well, yeah, but I mean specifically for goblins and elves is that they're both really favorable. Like even with the changes for turbo,
Mm.
they're both very favorable matchups. So
Okay,
it would be kind of
so
be
we can play
like,
more of like a hammer for the peacekeeper type of thing.
yeah, like I've seen people run like Golgari Charm, which is, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that kind of card. I think if I want, I think I want my, like if we're specifically we're shifting the sideboard around to make sure we have a third answer to Peacekeeper specifically for Vile that happens to like dovetail into other matchups. Like I do not want a card that can get countered. Like I just like foresee this game where the Peacekeeper sits on the board for 3 or 4 turns while we're drawing to our out, and we draw our out and they counter it with Force of Will. Like I want that, whatever that card is, to just be 100% of the time going to get that thing off the table.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, like hmm. Yeah, it like seems like it depends on where you want to shift the percentage points. Like,
yeah, I think the thing with Engineer is I don't know where else like it would really help all that much. Like I feel like most of
yeah,
the tribal decks, like sure you could jam it in Burst DNT, um, in some other spots, but I feel like most of the tribal decks are already pretty favored. Um,
it feels like the spot that might go is like the collector oof for the third decay. Just like,
yeah,
I don't
and
know.
the issue that you like cutting that card, like I definitely think that's the 15th card, but it's just so strong in some matchups that are kind of hard. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's just a like really good versus TES, and obviously it's good versus Storm, and those are kind of pretty hard matchups for Turbo. And then
yeah,
obviously like,
kind of like similar to the ley line thing. Like, you're not investing a lot, but then you can increase the probability of you winning just because you can just luck into it some amount of the time.
yeah, and when you do have it in your opener, it's almost always a turn one play with the 8 accelerants. So, you know, on the play versus any of those Storm decks or Belcher or Karn-Echo or any of these heavy artifact decks, it's a crippling card. So, but
Um, yeah, okay. I'm probably good at this point
all right,
though. I'm tapped out.
all right. Well, it is a work night, so I should probably call it as well. But thanks for doing this, and
Yeah, we'll definitely have a follow up for part two.
sounds good. And if we get any feedback, maybe we could do it in a more efficient or effective way. Maybe mix in a little bit more questions and stories, so we're not doing 2 hours straight of matchups. Or I don't know. Maybe we'll actually play a game of Magic. Who knows?
Can't have that on our Magic stream. That would fetch too many viewers, and then it would just be a cycle from there of just more people coming, more people chatting, and then before you know it, no sideboard guide.
Well, or instead of a 2-part series, it becomes a 4-part series.
Oh geez, I did not sign up for that. I'm gonna have to talk to my agent, who's me.
uh, I don't know. I spoke to your agent, I believe last week, and I believe he said you're always up for anything.
That is true. My agent, who is me, definitely said that. So we'll see. I don't even know what I'm getting myself into, but tonight was fun, so I'll definitely be back for part two minimally.
Sounds good. I believe I did respond. I believe my exact response to you was you have no idea what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, I,
So,
I still don't know. he also asked for. I forgot what you asked me for, like randomly, but you like sent a message to the wrong chat, and it was really funny. Just like the timing.
These things happen.
Yeah.
All right.
But it was great, like that you sent it to the wrong chat, but it's still applicable to our chat, and you're like, no, actually, like that.
Good times. Oh, by the way, that stifle, the stifle VOD, the Jarvis stifle VOD, I sent that to you and one other person, and I got ratted out. So at first I was trying to calculate the probability that you ratted me out, but it was not you. The true,
I mean,
the true
the
culprit.
probability may had to be like, I don't know, like 22% or something. Like it can't be that high.
Yeah, I didn't think it was you, but considering the possibility pool was exactly two people, it had to be considered. So,
Yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way as long as it's below 50%.
I didn't give you a number, but we'll go with 20.
As long as it's not 92%.
Aren't we with 97? Isn't it officially Negator Wolf
Yeah,
97?
Negator Wolf 97 Cyborg Guy.
Should it be suggestions? Sideboard suggestions? Is that less harsh than guide? Because guide kind of like implies that this is what you should do. You should follow the guide.
Well, suggestions is better also because people would question the assumptions more.
All right, that's definitely getting changed. I like that. All right, well, for next time, that will actually say suggestions, and we will finish it up.
Awesome.
Otherwise, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, have a good night.
Everybody that's still hanging out, take it easy.
Yeah, you people can have a good night too.